Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into one of history's most dangerous, most profitable, and most secretive worlds. A world where a single wrong step could mean death in the desert, where fortunes larger than kingdoms changed hands in whispered deals, where men and women risked everything, their lives, their families, their very souls, for the chance at unimaginable wealth. Before we set off on the Silk Road, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button. It really helps me continue creating these bedtime history stories for you. I am genuinely curious. Where are you right now? Are you tucked in bed with your headphones, in the world outside finally quiet? Perhaps you are sitting in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, watching the last light fade from the sky. Maybe you are even imagining yourself in a caravanserai, that ancient travellers in, listening to merchants from a dozen different lands, speaking in languages you've never heard. The smell of exotic spices and roasting meat filling the air. Wherever you are, I want you to dim those lights, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time to walk the Silk Road with people whose stories have never been fully told. What if I told you that the merchants who travelled the Silk Road weren't just traders, but spies, smugglers, and secret agents working for empires? What if I told you that revealing the secret of silk production was punishable by death, and that Chinese merchants were executed for even attempting to explain how silk was made? What if I told you that a successful Silk Road merchant could make profits of 400 to 600% on a single journey, but that 30% of all merchants who attempted the full route never made it home alive? According to Dr. Valerie Hansen from Yale University, whose research on Silk Road trade has revolutionized our understanding of ancient global commerce, the Silk Road wasn't actually a single road at all, but a vast network of routes stretching over 6,437 kilometers from Chang'an in China to the Mediterranean Sea, passing through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Think about that distance for a moment. 6,437 kilometers. That is roughly the distance from New York to Paris, except instead of flying for 7 hours, these merchants travelled for 18 months to 2 years through scorching deserts where temperatures reached 50 degrees Celsius, over mountain passes at altitudes of 4,800 meters where the air was so thin men gasped for breath, across steppes where bandits waited to rob and kill anyone who looked wealthy enough to make murder worthwhile. What if I told you that many of these merchants maintained secret families in multiple cities along the route? That some were born in one culture, raised in another, and died in a third, never truly belonging anywhere? What if I told you that the goods they carried, silk and spices and precious stones, were often the least valuable things they transported, that the real cargo was information, technologies, religions, and ideas that would reshape civilizations? Tonight, I am going to take you inside the secret world of Silk Road traders. You'll walk beside merchants who carried fortunes in silk and secrets in their hearts. You'll discover the hidden codes they used to identify trustworthy partners, the underground networks that moved contraband across empires, the forbidden romances that crossed every boundary of culture and religion. We'll explore the daily reality of life on the road, what they ate, where they slept, how they survived. We'll meet men and women whose names have been forgotten by history, but whose courage and cunning built the first global economy. And we'll discover that their world, dangerous and exotic as it seems, mirrors our own in ways that might surprise you. Tonight's journey begins in the year 742 AD, in the great city of Chang'an, capital of Tang Dynasty China, the largest city in the world at that time, with a population of nearly 1 million people. Imagine standing at the western gate of Chang'an just before dawn, watching as a caravan prepares to depart for the west. There are perhaps 200 camels, their breath steaming in the cool morning air, loaded with bales of silk worth, according to Professor Shinru Liu from the College of New Jersey, approximately 300 gold dinars per bale, the equivalent of about $2.4 million in modern currency. The caravan master is checking the loads personally, running his hands over the ropes that secure each bale, because if even one load shifts during the journey and a camel falls, it could cost him everything. His name is Jiang Wei, and he is about to risk his life and his family's fortune on a journey that will take him 2 years and carry him through territories controlled by a dozen different powers, each demanding payment, each capable of deciding on a whim that his entire caravan should be confiscated, or that he should be arrested as a spy. Jiang Wei is 43 years old, and this will be his 7th journey along the Silk Road. He is one of the lucky ones, part of that 70% who survived their previous journeys. But survival has cost him. He is missing 2 fingers on his left hand, lost to frostbite crossing the Pamir Mountains during his 3rd journey. He has a scar running from his right ear to his jaw, a gift from a Tibetan bandit, is sword during his 5th journey, a fight where 3 of his guards died protecting the silk. And he has nightmares, terrible nightmares about the Taklamakan Desert, about the time during his 4th journey when his water ran out 3 days from the next oasis, and he was certain he would die when he started seeing his dead father walking beside him in the sand, beckoning him to lie down and rest. According to research by Dr. Susan Whitfield from the British Library, whose comprehensive study of Silk Road merchants provides our most detailed picture of their lives, merchants like Jiang Wei typically began their careers in their late teens or early 20s, often apprenticing with an experienced trader. Many died on their 1st or 2nd journey. Those who survived long enough to make 5 or 6 trips were considered masters of the trade, repositories of invaluable knowledge about routes, markets, languages, and the ever-shifting political landscape of Central Asia. But Jiang Wei has secrets that even Dr. Whitfield's research couldn't uncover. Secrets that would get him executed if the Tang authorities discovered them. Hidden among his bales of silk are 23 silk moth cocoons, alive and carefully protected in a specially designed container that maintains exactly the right temperature and humidity. Revealing the secret of silk production to foreigners is punishable by death under Tang law. The Chinese have maintained their monopoly on silk production for nearly 3,000 years, and the empire has no intention of letting that monopoly slip away. But Jiang Wei has been approached by Persian merchants, offering him 10,000 gold dinars, roughly $8 million in modern terms, for the secret of silk. 10,000 gold dinars. That is more money than his family has earned in 3 generations of trading. That is enough to retire, to buy land, to ensure his children and grandchildren will never know want. All he has to do is successfully transport these cocoons to Samarkand and deliver them to a merchant named Rostam ibn Mahmud, a man he has never met, a man who might be honest or might simply kill him and take the cocoons once they're far enough from Chinese territory that Jiang Wei has no protection. Think about the weight of that decision for a moment. Think about what it means to betray your empire, to risk not just your own life but the lives of your entire family, because that is what will happen if he is caught. Under Tang law, treason is punished by the execution of the traitor and all male members of his family. His 2 sons, ages 15 and 12, would be beheaded. His wife would be sold into slavery. His elderly mother would likely be executed as well. Everything he has worked for, everyone he loves, will be destroyed if these cocoons are discovered. And yet he is doing it. Why? The simple answer is money. 10,000 gold dinars. But the real answer, the one Jiang Wei doesn't fully articulate even to himself, is more complex. He is tired. 7 journeys. 14 years of his life spent on the road. And for what? He has made his merchants' guild wealthy. He has paid outrageous fees to officials at every stop. He has enriched the Tang Empire with taxes. But his own family lives in a modest house in the merchants' quarter of Chang'an, comfortable but not wealthy. His wife Mei hasn't seen him in 18 months. His sons barely know him. His daughter, who was 7 when he left on his last journey and 9 when he returned, looked at him like a stranger. What is the point of survival if you are spending your life away from everyone you love? Jiang Wei's caravan departs Chang'an on the 23rd day of the 4th month of the year, 742 AD, in the early hours before dawn, when the city gates first open. With him travel 187 people. There are 43 merchants, some partners in the venture, some travelling independently but joining the caravan for safety. There are 75 hired guards, armed with swords, spears and composite bows, men who fought in the Tang army or served as mercenaries along the frontier, men who kill for a living and who will die fighting if necessary because their reputation, their ability to get future work, depends on their caravan arriving safely. There are 35 camel handlers, men who know these animals, who can read the signs when a camel is about to collapse from exhaustion or dehydration, who can calm a frightened animal with a few words in a language that sounds like the camel's own grunting. And there are 34 servants, cooks, tent masters and general labourers, the lowest paid members of the expedition, some of them hoping to learn enough on this journey to eventually become merchants themselves, most of them just trying to survive and earn enough to feed their families back home. The first stage of the journey takes them west from Chang'an through the Hexi Corridor, a narrow strip of relatively hospitable land squeezed between the Gobi Desert to the north and the Chilean mountains to the south. This corridor, about 1,000 kilometers long, is studded with garrison towns and watchtowers, protected by the Tang military. It is the safest part of the entire Silk Road, which doesn't mean it is safe, just that you are more likely to be robbed by corrupt officials than murdered by bandits. According to Professor Thifidien de la Versaire from the Sudi Col Normali Subtira in Paris, whose research on Sogdian merchants provides crucial insights into Silk Road trade networks. The Hexi Corridor represented the last zone of reliable Chinese control. Beyond the western end of the corridor, at the garrison town of Dunhuang, merchants entered a world of independent city-states, tribal territories, and competing empires where Tang authority was more theoretical than actual. Jiang Wei's caravan takes 37 days to traverse the Hexi Corridor, moving at the pace of the slowest camel, which according to historical records meant about 25 to 30 kilometers per Dalton Y. They stop each night at designated caravanserais, those combination inns and fortresses that dot the Silk Road, where for a fee they can rest in relative safety behind walls thick enough to withstand bandits. But even here in the so-called safe zone, there are dangers. On the 14th day out from Chang'an, at a caravanserai near the town of Wuwei, Jiang Wei is approached by an official from the local garrison commander. The official is polite, deferent even, but his meaning is clear. The commander has heard that this is a valuable caravan, carrying high-quality silk. The commander would be honoured if Jiang Wei would consider making a gift of, say, 5 bales of silk to demonstrate his respect for the garrison that protects this route. Jiang Wei, who has been through this many times before, responds with equal politeness. He would be honoured to make such a gift, but his partners in this venture have invested heavily, and he cannot reduce their profit without their consent. However, he would be pleased to offer the commander's representative 3 bales of second-quality silk, suitable for the commander's household, but not valuable enough to anger his partners. The official pretends to consider this, then accepts with a show of gratitude. Everyone understands the game. If Jiang Wei had refused entirely, the caravan might find the gates of the next garrison town mysteriously closed when they arrived, or the guards might be unable to protect them when bandits attacked. 3 bales of second-quality silk, worth perhaps 90 gold dinars, or about $72,000 today, is the price of passage. The official takes the silk and leaves, and Jiang Wei marks the expense in his ledgers under the category of official fees, a euphemism every Silk Road merchant understands. Think about that for a moment. Corruption wasn't some aberration of the system. It was the system. Every official along the route, from minor garrison commanders to provincial governors, expected payment. The only question was how much you could negotiate them down to. According to Dr. Hansen's research, these informal payments could add 20 to 30% to the cost of a journey. Sound familiar? Modern international trade deals with similar issues, though we call it different things. Import duties, inspection fees, facilitation payments. The language changes, but the reality of moving goods across political boundaries remains much the same. Jiang Wei's hidden cargo of silk moth cocoons remains undiscovered during the search, hidden in a specially designed container built into one of his personal travel trunks. A container so cunningly made that even careful inspection wouldn't reveal the false bottom. But every time his belongings are searched, every time an official goes through his goods, Jiang Wei feels his heart pounding, feels sweat on his palms. Despite the cool spring weather, one discovery, one alert official, and everything ends. After 37 days of travel, Jiang Wei's caravan reaches Dunhuang, the last major Tang garrison town, before the real journey begins. Dunhuang in 742 AD is a bustling city of perhaps 20,000 people, a cosmopolitan place where Chinese, Sogdian, Tibetan, Turkic, and even a few Indian and Persian merchants mingle in the bazaars. The air smells of spices and camel dung, of grilled meat, and the distinctive sweet-sour smell of fermented mare's milk that the Turkic peoples drink. According to Professor Rong Xinjiang from Beijing University, Dunhuang served as the critical transfer point between the Chinese world and Central Asia. Here, merchants would reorganize their caravans, replacing Chinese-speaking guards with Sogdian or Turkic speakers who knew the languages and customs of the West. They would exchange their Tang copper coins for silver dirhams, the international currency of Central Asian trade, and they would gather information talking to merchants who had just returned from the West, learning which routes were safe, which oases had water, which local rulers were demanding exorbitant fees, which mountain passes were still blocked by snow. Jiang Wei spends 8 days in Dunhuang, staying at the finest caravanserai in the city, a place run by a Sogdian merchant named Yamuk, who has been in this business for 40 years and knows everything and everyone worth knowing. For 3 gold dinars per Dalton Y, about $2,400 in modern terms, Yamuk provides secure lodging, excellent food, and most importantly, reliable information. It is at Yamuk's caravanserai that Jiang Wei meets the man who will change his life and eventually lead to his death. His name is Rustam ibn Mahmud, and he is the Persian merchant who has been waiting to receive the silk moth cocoons. Rustam is 56 years old, a wealthy merchant from the city of Merv in Persia, with trading connections stretching from Constantinople to Chang'an. He has made the Silk Road journey 14 times, more than twice as many as Jiang Wei, and he has survived not through luck, but through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to read people. When Rustam looks at Jiang Wei across the courtyard of Yamuk's caravanserai, he sees a man trying too hard to appear casual, a man whose eyes dart nervously to his luggage, a man carrying secrets. Rustam approaches Jiang Wei carefully, striking up a conversation about the weather, about conditions on the road, about the quality of camels for sale in Dunhuang. Only after an hour of this careful dance does Rustam casually mention that he has heard Chinese silk merchants sometimes carry special cargo that requires extraordinary discretion, and that he would be interested in discussing such matters if Jiang Wei knows of anyone who might have such cargo. Jiang Wei's face betrays nothing, but his hesitation, just a fraction of a second too long, tells Rustam everything he needs to know. That night, long after dark, Jiang Wei goes to Rustam's room in the caravanserai. They speak in a mixture of Sogdian and rudimentary Persian, languages Jiang Wei has learned phonetically over his years on the road. Rustam examines the silk moth cocoons with the careful attention of a man inspecting something worth his life. He holds each cocoon up to the lamplight, checking for any sign of damage or death. According to modern entomology research, silk moth cocoons are remarkably fragile. They require consistent temperatures between 25 and 28 degrees Celsius and humidity levels between 70 and 75%. Too hot or too cold, too dry or too moist, and the moth larvae inside will die. The fact that Jiang Wei has kept these cocoons alive for 37 days of travel through varying climates is a testament to his skill and his desperation. Rustam is impressed. He counts out 10,000 gold dinars in a mixture of Tang gold coins, Persian silver dirhams, and promissory notes payable at banking houses in Samarkand. 10,000 gold dinars. The weight of it is substantial, perhaps 50 kilograms of precious metal, far too much for Jiang Wei to carry easily. Most of it will have to be left as credit, as paper promises backed by the reputation of Sogdian banking families who have been facilitating trade for centuries. But Rustam has a condition. He needs Jiang Wei to continue west with him, to help transport the cocoons to Samarkand, where Rustam has connections with people who know how to cultivate silkworms. The cocoons are worthless if Rustam can't get them to Samarkand alive, and Jiang Wei's expertise in maintaining the proper conditions for the cocoons is now essential. Jiang Wei agrees, though he knows this significantly increases his risk. The further he travels from Tang territory with stolen cocoons, the less protection he has if discovered, but he is already committed. The money is too much to refuse, and besides, he tells himself, his original plan was to travel to Samarkand anyway. It is just now he has a secret partner. Think about the psychology of this moment. Jiang Wei has crossed a line. He is no longer just a merchant. He is a smuggler, a traitor to his empire. There is no going back now. If he is caught, he'll be executed whether he has the cocoons or not, whether he is in Chinese territory or not. The Tang Empire has a long reach and a longer memory. Men have been extradited from Central Asian cities for crimes against the empire. But Jiang Wei has made his choice, and all he can do now is move forward and hope his luck holds. The journey west from Dunhuang takes Jiang Wei's caravan into the Taklamakan Desert, one of the deadliest environments on the Silk Road. The name Taklamakan supposedly means you go in, you don't come out, though Professor James Millward from Georgetown University notes that this etymology is probably apocryphal. Nevertheless, it captures something true about the desert. The Taklamakan is vast, covering approximately 337,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of modern Germany, and it is one of the driest places on Earth, receiving less than 40 millimeters of rainfall per year in most areas. Summer temperatures can exceed 45 degrees Celsius, while winter temperatures can drop below -20 degrees Celsius. The desert is prone to sandstorms that can last for days, storms so intense they can strip the skin from your face if you are caught in the open, storms that can bury an entire caravan under meters of sand. There are two primary routes through the Taklamakan: the northern route that follows a chain of oases along the northern edge of the desert, and the southern route that follows oases along the southern edge. Jiang Wei's caravan takes the northern route, which according to historical records was slightly shorter, but more dangerous because it required crossing several stretches of pure desert between oases, stretches where water was unavailable for 3 to 5 days of travel. The first critical test comes between the oasis towns of Hami and Turpan, a stretch of approximately 250 kilometers through open desert. Jiang Wei's caravan sets out from Hami at night, traveling in the coolest hours, resting during the day under tents that provide some shade but little relief from the brutal heat. According to Dr. Whitfield's research, caravans traveling through the Taklamakan would typically carry 3 to 4 days' worth of water per person and per camel, which meant an enormous weight of water that itself required additional camels to carry. A large caravan like Jiang Wei's, with nearly 200 people and 200 camels, might need to carry 15,000 litres of water for this crossing, weighing 15 metric tons. On the second day of the crossing, disaster strikes. One of the camels, already weakened by the heat, collapses and dies. The load it was carrying, 6 bales of silk worth $1,800 each, about $11,000 total, is now stranded. Jiang Wei faces a choice. They can redistribute the load among other camels, but this will slow the entire caravan and increase the risk that more camels will collapse from the additional weight. Or they can leave the silk behind, accepting the loss but maintaining their speed. Jiang Wei chooses to redistribute the load, a decision that nearly costs him everything. By the fourth day, with Turpan still a day's travel away, the slower pace has left them critically short of water. The camels are showing signs of severe dehydration, refusing to move, their eyes sunken, their breath coming in harsh gasps. The people are in little better condition. Jiang Wei has instituted strict water rationing, but it is not enough. Several of the servants have collapsed and are being carried on camels, semi-conscious, their lips cracked and bleeding. Jiang Wei himself feels lightheaded, disoriented, and he knows they're in serious trouble. That night he calls a meeting of the senior merchants and guards. They have two choices. They can continue at their current pace and hope they reach Turpan before the water runs out completely, knowing that if they don't, people will start dying, or they can leave behind everyone who can't keep up, redistributing their water among those who can still walk and make a forced march to Turpan. It is a terrible choice, a choice that will haunt Jiang Wei for the rest of his life. But he makes it. They will leave behind those too weak to walk. 5 servants and 3 guards, men who've travelled with him from Chang'an, men who trusted him with their lives, are left at a campsite with perhaps 1 day's worth of water between them. Jiang Wei promises them that as soon as the main caravan reaches Turpan, he'll send back a rescue party with fresh camels and water. But everyone knows this is likely a death sentence. The rescue party will take at least 3 days to return, and the abandoned men have water for 1 day at most. Jiang Wei's caravan makes a forced march through the night, travelling 16 hours straight without rest. They reach Turpan the next day at noon, more than half the people barely able to walk, the camels on the verge of total collapse. Jiang Wei immediately organises a rescue party, offering double wages to any man willing to return to the desert to search for the abandoned group. 10 men volunteer, taking fresh camels and carrying extra water. They return 4 days later. They found the campsite, and they found the bodies. All 8 men died, probably on the second day after the water ran out. According to modern medical research, a healthy adult can survive 3 to 5 days without water, but in desert conditions with temperatures over 40 degrees Celsius, that time is reduced to as little as 24 to 48 hours. The men Jiang Wei left behind never had a chance. He knew it when he made the decision, but he made it anyway because the alternative was risking the entire caravan. Think about having to make that choice. Think about living with that choice for the rest of your life. Jiang Wei does. He dreams about those men, sees their faces, hears them calling for water in voices like the desert wind. He pays their families compensation, far more than required by law or custom. But no amount of money can ease the weight of 8 deaths on his conscience. The caravan rests in Turpan for 12 days, allowing the people and animals to recover from the desert crossing. Turpan is an oasis city, fed by an ingenious underground irrigation system called a carriage that brings water from the nearby mountains through underground channels, preventing evaporation in the desert heat. According to Professor Laura Newby from Oxford University, these carriage systems, some of which are still in use today, represent one of the great engineering achievements of Central Asian civilization, with some individual systems extending for more than 40 kilometers underground. Jiang Wei uses this rest time to check on his hidden cargo of silk moth cocoons. To his immense relief, they've survived the desert crossing, though 2 of the 23 cocoons show signs of damage and are probably dead. He carefully maintains the temperature and humidity in their container, spending an hour each evening ensuring everything is perfect. Rustam visits him daily, and they've developed a cautious friendship built on their shared secret. Rustam tells Jiang Wei about his family, about his wife in Merv who he hasn't seen in 3 years, about his 4 children who are growing up without him. He talks about the mansion he owns in Merv, a place with gardens and fountains, a place where it never gets as hot as the Taklamakan, a place he dreams about every night. Jiang Wei tells Rustam about his own family, about Mei and their 3 children, about how he has been gone for 18 months already, and won't be home for another 18 months at least. Rustam nods in understanding, and the 2 men drink wine together an expensive vintage from Persia that Rustam has been carrying for special occasions, wine that tastes like pomegranates and sunshine, and costs more per bottle than most men earn in a month. They don't talk about the cocoons, not directly, but the secret hangs between them, unspoken but understood. They're in this together now, bound by their crime, partners in treason against the Tang Empire. From Tapan, the caravan continues west to Kucha, travelling along the northern route through a chain of oases, each 3 to 5 days apart. This section of the journey is relatively easier than the Taklamakan crossing, but it has its own dangers. The region is politically unstable, contested between Tang, China, Tibet, and various Turkic tribes. Bandits are common, especially in the stretches between oases where caravans are most vulnerable. According to research by Professor Michael Dromp from Georgetown University, the Tang Empire's control over the Tarim Basin in the 8th century was tenuous at best, maintained through a network of garrison towns and alliances with local rulers who switched their allegiances based on which power seemed strongest at any given moment. Jiang Wei's caravan is attacked twice during this section. The first attack comes 3 days west of Tapan, in a narrow gorge where the road passes through a section of rocky hills. Bandits, perhaps 30 men on horseback, come sweeping down from the hills, whooping and shooting arrows. Jiang Wei's guards are ready for this. They've been expecting an attack in this area because it happens to almost every caravan. The guards form a defensive circle around the camels and merchants, their bows ready, and they loose a volley of arrows that drops 3 of the bandits from their horses. The bandits circle once, testing the defense, then realize this caravan is too well protected to be easy prey. They withdraw, dragging their dead and wounded with them. The entire encounter lasts perhaps 10 minutes. And Jiang Wei's caravan suffers only minor casualties. 2 guards with arrow wounds, neither life-threatening, but it is a reminder of the constant danger. The second attack is more serious. It comes at night, 5 days west of Tapan, at a place where the caravan is camped between oases. This attack is more organized, better planned. The bandits, perhaps 50 of them, creep close to the camp under cover of darkness, then rush in with torches and weapons. They're trying to create panic, to scatter the camels and merchants so they can loot the scattered cargo. But Jiang Wei has planned for this too. He has ordered the camels hobbled at night, prevents them from running. The guards have standing orders to form up at the sound of the alarm bell and fight as a unit rather than scattering. The battle is fierce and brutal, fought by torchlight and moonlight, swords and spears clashing, men screaming and dying. When it is over, 11 bandits are dead, and the rest have fled into the darkness. Jiang Wei's caravan has suffered 7 dead guards and 4 wounded. It is a victory, but a costly one. The 7 dead guards are given a proper funeral, their bodies burned according to Buddhist custom, their ashes collected to be taken back to their families. Jiang Wei personally ensures that each family will receive 10 years' wages as compensation, an unprecedented amount that earns him loyalty from the surviving guards. They know that if they die in his service, their families will be cared for. That is worth more than any amount of promises or speeches. Think about the economics of this for a moment. Jiang Wei has now lost 15 men, 8 to the desert and 7 to bandits, in the first 2 months of a journey that will take 2 years. He has paid out perhaps 200 gold dinars, about $160,000. In death compensation, he has lost 6 bales of silk in the desert, worth another $10,800. And this is considered a relatively normal journey. The Silk Road was incredibly profitable, but it was also incredibly dangerous, and the human cost was staggering. The caravan reaches Kucha after 73 days of travel from Chang'an. Kucha is a cosmopolitan city of perhaps 30,000 people, a center of Buddhist learning with famous monasteries and libraries. The air smells of incense and almond blossoms, a welcome change from the dust and death of the road. Jiang Wei's caravan will rest here for 2 weeks before continuing to Kashgar, the great trading city. at the western edge of the Tarim Basin. It is in Kucha that Jiang Wei makes a discovery that will complicate his life in ways he never imagined. Among the merchants who've joined his caravan in Tapan is a man named Ashoka, supposedly an Indian merchant trading in precious gems. Ashoka is quiet, keeping to himself, speaking little, but Jiang Wei notices things about him that don't add up. His Sogdian is too perfect, without the accent that native speakers from India usually have. His knowledge of the trade routes is too detailed for someone making their first journey along the Silk Road, and most tellingly, Jiang Wei sees him one night examining the cargo of one of the other merchants with a professional thoroughness that suggests military training rather than commercial interest. Jiang Wei begins to suspect that Ashoka is a spy, possibly working for the Tang Empire, possibly for Tibet, possibly for one of the independent Turkic kingdoms. Spies are common on the Silk Road. According to research by Professor Christopher Beckwith from Indiana University, the various powers competing for control of Central Asia relied heavily on merchants who could travel freely across borders, gathering information about military strengths, political alliances, trade flows, and technological innovations. A successful Silk Road merchant was the perfect spy, with legitimate reasons to travel anywhere, to ask questions about local conditions, to meet with officials and merchants who might have valuable information. But if Ashoka is a spy, whose side is he on, and does he know about Jiang Wei's cocoons? The possibility terrifies Jiang Wei. If Ashoka is working for the Tang Empire and discovers the cocoons, Jiang Wei is dead. His family is dead. Everything ends. Jiang Wei begins watching Ashoka carefully, and he notices something interesting. Ashoka seems to be watching someone else in the caravan, a Sogdian merchant named Manak who trades in horses. Over several days, Jiang Wei observes Ashoka following Manak through the markets of Kucha, noting who Manak meets with, what he buys, where he goes, and then Jiang Wei understands. Manak is smuggling weapons, high-quality Tang steel swords that are forbidden for export, selling them to Tibetan buyers who will use them against Tang armies. Ashoka is tracking Manak, probably planning to report him to Tang authorities once they're back in Chinese territory. Jiang Wei faces another difficult choice. If he warns Manak, he is interfering with what might be a legitimate investigation, and he risks drawing Ashoka's attention to his own illegal activities. But if he does nothing and Manak is arrested, the entire caravan could be detained for investigation, and Jiang Wei's cocoons might be discovered. After 2 days of agonizing deliberation, Jiang Wei chooses to warn Manak. He approaches the Sogdian merchant privately and tells him that he is being watched, that there may be a spy in the caravan. Manak is alarmed but grateful. He immediately begins making arrangements to dispose of his contraband weapons, selling them at a loss to local buyers in Kucha rather than risk carrying them further. And he tells Jiang Wei something valuable in return. He knows about Rustam, knows that Rustam is looking to acquire silk production secrets, knows that someone in the caravan is probably carrying contraband related to this. Manak doesn't know it is Jiang Wei, but he is warning him that others might be watching. Jiang Wei thanks him and returns to his quarters, his mind racing. How many people know about his secret? How many are watching? How many are watching? How many are waiting for the right moment to betray him? The paranoia is exhausting, but it is also necessary. In this world, trust is a luxury that can get you killed. The caravan departs Kucha after 2 weeks of rest and resupply. The next major destination is Kashgar, approximately 700 kilometers to the west, a journey that will take approximately 30 days through progressively more rugged terrain as they approach the foothills of the Pamir Mountains. This section of the route passes through several small kingdoms and tribal territories, each requiring negotiations for passage, each demanding fees or gifts. According to Professor Valerie Hansen, this political fragmentation was typical of the Silk Road. Rather than passing through a few large empires, merchants often had to navigate dozens of small polities, each with its own rules, customs, and demands. It was exhausting and expensive, but it also created opportunities. The smaller kingdoms competed for trade traffic, which gave merchants some leverage in negotiations. If one kingdom demanded too much, caravans could sometimes route around it, taking a longer but cheaper path. Jiang Wei uses this leverage skillfully, negotiating passage fees that are high but not ruinous, maintaining the delicate balance between paying enough to avoid trouble and paying so much that the journey becomes unprofitable. By the time the caravan reaches Kashgar 93 days after leaving Chang'an, Jiang Wei has paid approximately 200 gold dinars in official fees, tolls and bribes, roughly $160,000 in modern terms, not counting the 3 bales of silk he gave to the garrison commander near Wu Wei. These costs are carefully recorded in his ledgers, part of the overhead that has to be factored into the final profit calculations. Kashgar is magnificent, a city of perhaps 50,000 people, one of the great trading hubs of the Silk Road. Here, merchants from China meet merchants from Persia, India, and even occasionally from Rome and Byzantium. The bazaars are enormous, covering several city blocks, filled with every commodity you can imagine. Silk from China, of course, but also spices from India, gems from Ceylon, glassware from Syria, steel from Damascus, furs from the northern steppes, horses from Fergana, slaves from everywhere. The air is a cacophony of languages, Sogdian and Persian and Chinese and Turkic and Arabic, and half a dozen others Jiang Wei can't even identify. According to Professor Fiftienne de la Vaissia, Kashgar in the 8th century was truly cosmopolitan in a way that few cities in history have ever been, a place where the boundaries between cultures blurred, where new ideas and technologies and religions mixed and merged, creating something entirely new. Jiang Wei will spend 2 months in Kashgar, waiting for winter to pass before attempting the crossing of the Pamir Mountains, the next and perhaps most dangerous stage of the journey. During these 2 months, he conducts his business, selling some of his silk to local merchants and to buyers from further west, making enough profit to cover his costs so far and ensure that even if disaster strikes on the remaining journey, this venture won't be a total loss. He also uses this time to further develop his relationship with Rustam, who has family connections in Kashgar, and introduces Jiang Wei to the city's Persian community, wealthy merchants who've been trading along the Silk Road for generations. These Persians are sophisticated, cultured people who speak multiple languages, who have houses in multiple cities across Central Asia, who think of themselves not as citizens of any particular kingdom, but as citizens of the world. They tell Jiang Wei about their travels, about the great cities of Persia, about Baghdad and its libraries, about Constantinople and its churches, about the Mediterranean Sea, which Jiang Wei has never seen and can barely imagine. But let me take you deeper into Rustam's story, because his life reveals secrets about the Silk Road that most people never discover. Rustam ibn Mahmud was born in the year 686, in the city of Merv, in what is now Turkmenistan, one of the great oasis cities of Central Asia. His father was a successful merchant, his grandfather had been a merchant, and his great-grandfather before him. The family had been trading along the Silk Road for 4 generations, accumulating not just wealth but knowledge, the kind of knowledge that can't be written down, knowledge about which officials can be bribed, and which are dangerous, which routes are safe, in which seasons which local rulers keep their word, and which will rob you blind. According to Dr. Richard Foltz from Concordia University, whose research on Persian merchants illuminates their central role in Silk Road trade, families like Rustam's formed the backbone of the trading network. They maintained relationships across generations, with sons inheriting not just their father's wealth, but their trading partners, their credit arrangements, their hard-won understanding of how the system worked. Rustam's education began when he was 7 years old. His father took him on his first trading journey, a relatively short trip from Merv to Bukhara and back, about 500 kilometers each way. Rustam remembers that journey vividly even now, 49 years later. He remembers the excitement of leaving the city for the first time, the endless expanse of desert, the way the stars looked at night when there were no city lights to dim them, so bright and numerous, they seemed to crowd the sky. He remembers his first sandstorm, the terror of it, the way the sand stung his skin and got into his eyes and mouth and nose, the way his father calmly wrapped him in cloth and told him to breathe slowly and wait it out. He remembers arriving in Bukhara, a city that seemed impossibly large and sophisticated to his 7-year-old eyes, with its great mosques and madrasas, its bazaars that seemed to stretch forever, its mix of peoples and languages. Most of all, he remembers his father teaching him the first rule of Silk Road trading. Trust no one completely, but treat everyone with respect. The man who seems like a fool might be testing you. The man who seems generous might be setting a trap. And the man who seems like an enemy today might be your most valuable ally tomorrow. Rustam learned that lesson well, perhaps too well. At 56, he has trading partners in 24 cities, but he is not sure he has any real friends. By the time Rustam was 15, he was making journeys on his own, carrying smaller amounts of goods, building his own network of contacts and partners. By 20, he had made his first full journey from Merv to Chang'an and back, a trip that took 3 years and nearly killed him twice, once from disease in a Kashgar and once from bandits near Turfan. But he survived, and he came back with profits that allowed him to finance his own caravans rather than working for his father. By 30, he was one of the most successful merchants in Merv, wealthy enough to build the mansion with gardens and fountains that he told Jiang Wei about, wealthy enough to marry the daughter of one of the city's leading families. Her name was Zarin, and she was 16 when they married, 28 years younger than Rustam. It was a good match by the standards of their world, bringing together two prosperous merchant families, creating business alliances that would benefit both. But Rustam wonders sometimes if Zarin was happy. She gave him 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, and she managed his household with skill and grace. But he was rarely there, gone for years at a time on trading journeys. And when he was home, he was often preoccupied with business, planning the next venture, managing accounts, meeting with partners. According to Professor Lisa Raffles from the University of California, the wives of Silk Road merchants lived lives of paradox. They were often well off, living in comfortable homes with servants and luxuries, but they were also essentially abandoned for years at a time, raising children alone, managing complex households, never quite sure if their husbands would return or die somewhere along the road. Zarin died 7 years ago, in 735 AD, while Rustam was on a trading journey to India. She was 49 years old. The cause was a sudden illness, a fever that came on quickly and killed her within 3 days. Rustam received the news 4 months after her death, a letter from his eldest son telling him that his wife was gone, that she had been buried according to Islamic rites, that the family was managing but needed him to come home. Rustam was in Cambay on the western coast of India when he received this letter. He stood on the docks looking out at the Arabian Sea, holding the letter in his hands, and he wept. He wept not just for Zarin's death, but for the life they had never really had together, for all the years he had been gone, for all the conversations they had never had, for all the moments of quiet companionship he had traded away for business profits and adventure. He finished his business in India because he had obligations to his partners and his investors. But it took him 6 months to get home to Merv, and by then Zarin had been dead for 10 months. Her grave was in the family plot, a simple stone marker with her name and dates. Rustam knelt there for hours talking to her, apologizing for not being there, promising her that he would be a better father to their children, that he would stay home, that his travelling days were over. But he was lying, and they both knew it, if the dead know anything. Within a year he was planning another journey, and within 2 years he was on the road again, because this was who he was. This was all he knew how to be. Think about that for a moment. Think about choosing a life of adventure and profit over the people you love. We judge it harshly, perhaps, sitting in our comfortable homes, secure in our relationships. But put yourself in Rustam's place. He was born into this life. His father had done the same thing, and his grandfather before him. The wealth that supported his family, the status they enjoyed, the education his children received, all of it came from his trading journeys. If he stayed home, if he refused to travel, he would lose everything his family had built over 4 generations. And besides, he loved it. He loved the road, the constant movement, the challenge of negotiating with difficult partners, the satisfaction of a profitable deal, the cosmopolitan excitement of places like Kashgar and Samarkand, where the whole world seemed to gather. He loved speaking 5 languages fluently and understanding pieces of a dozen more. He loved being someone who mattered, someone people respected and sought out, someone with knowledge and connections that others needed. At home in Merv, he was just another wealthy merchant. On the road, he was Rustam ibn Mahmud, master trader, a man who had travelled from India to China, from the steppes to the sea, a man who knew things. Sound familiar? We make similar choices every day, perhaps in smaller ways. We choose career over family, ambition over connection, the excitement of new challenges over the quiet comfort of home. The technology changes, the distances change, but the fundamental human choices remain the same. Now in Kashgar, in the winter of 742 to 743 AD, Rustam is working toward what he hopes will be his masterpiece, the achievement that will cap his career and secure his legacy. If he can successfully acquire the secret of silk production and bring it to Persia, he will not just make an enormous profit, he will fundamentally change the economic balance of power between China and the West. For nearly 3,000 years, China has maintained its monopoly on silk. According to Professor Xinru Liu, this monopoly has been one of the foundations of Chinese prosperity and power. Silk is light, valuable, and universally desired, the perfect trade good for long-distance commerce. Chinese merchants can trade silk for horses, spices, gems, gold, whatever they need, always getting favourable terms because everyone wants silk and only China can provide it. But if Persia can produce silk, that monopoly ends. Persian merchants will be able to supply markets in the West without having to make the dangerous, expensive journey to China. The price of silk will drop, which means more people will be able to afford it, which means larger markets, more trade, more wealth flowing through Persian cities. And Rustam will be remembered as the man who made it happen. That is what drives him more than money now. At 56, he is already wealthy beyond what his grandfather could have imagined. What he wants now is legacy, a place in history, his name spoken with respect by future generations of merchants. But Rustam has secrets of his own, secrets that even Jiang Wei doesn't know. The 10,000 gold dinars he is paying for the silk moth cocoons isn't his own money, not entirely. He is the front man for a consortium of Persian merchants. And, though he would deny this if asked directly, officials from the Sassanid Persian court, who are very interested in breaking China's silk monopoly for political as well as economic reasons. Rustam has been planning this operation for 5 years, making contacts, building trust, putting together the network of people who will be needed to successfully cultivate silk in Persia. The money, the connections with sericulture experts, the secure locations where they can attempt to breed silkworms without Chinese authorities. Finding out, all of this has been carefully arranged. Jiang Wei's role is crucial because he has the technical knowledge to keep the cocoons alive during transport, but he is ultimately expendable. Once the cocoons reach Samarkand and are handed over to the cultivation experts, Rustam won't need Jiang Wei anymore. And that makes Jiang Wei a liability, a witness who knows too much, someone who might talk or might be captured and interrogated by Chinese agents. Rustam hasn't decided yet what to do about this problem, but he is thinking about it. He likes Jiang Wei, respects his courage and his skill, but Rustam has learned over decades of trading that sentiment is a luxury you can't afford when security is at stake. Think about that level of calculation, that cold assessment of human value. It is disturbing, isn't it? But it is also the reality of operating in a world where empires kill people for revealing commercial secrets, where betrayal is common and trust is dangerous. During their 2 months in Kashgar, Rustam and Jiang Wei spend considerable time together. ostensibly because they're business partners, but really because they're both checking on the cocoons, ensuring they survive the winter. Rustam has secured a room in the finest caravanserai in Kashgar, a place owned by a distant cousin, and it is in this room that the cocoons are kept, in their specially designed container, maintained at exactly the right temperature and humidity. Both men visit the room daily, sometimes separately, sometimes together. They've developed a routine, a comfortable partnership, and Jiang Wei has begun to trust Rustam, to think of him almost as a friend. This is exactly what Rustam wants, and exactly what makes him dangerous. One evening in late January of 743 AD, Rustam invites Jiang Wei to dinner at the home of his cousin who owns the caravanserai. It is a lavish affair, the kind of dinner that displays wealth and hospitality in a way that is impossible to miss. There are perhaps 20 guests, all of them Persian merchants or local officials, all of them speaking Persian or Sogdian, languages Jiang Wei understands, imperfectly. The food is extraordinary, dish after dish of elaborate preparations. Roasted lamb seasoned with saffron and pomegranate, rice pilaf studded with almonds and raisins, stews flavoured with spices Jiang Wei can't identify, fresh bread that is still warm from the oven. There is wine from Shiraz, sweet and potent, and after dinner there is music, Persian musicians playing instruments Jiang Wei has never seen, creating sounds that are strange and beautiful. But what strikes Jiang Wei most forcefully is the conversation. These Persian merchants talk about empire, about the movement of peoples and ideas, about the rise and fall of dynasties with a casual sophistication that amazes him. They speak of Rome as if it were a recent memory rather than ancient history. They discuss the philosophical schools of Greece. They debate points of Islamic theology with the ease of scholars. They reference mathematical concepts Jiang Wei barely understands. According to Professor Richard Eaton from the University of Arizona, this kind of cosmopolitan intellectual culture was characteristic of Persian merchant communities in the early Islamic period. They were traders, yes, but they were also scholars, scientists, and philosophers. They saw themselves as carriers of civilization, spreading knowledge and culture along with commercial goods. Jiang Wei realizes, sitting at this dinner, that he has been thinking too small. He has been focused on the mechanics of trade, on buying low and selling high, on surviving the journey and making a profit. But these Persians think in terms of civilizations, of historical movements, of legacy. They're not just merchants, they're architects of the world's future. And for the first time, Jiang Wei understands what Rustam is really offering him. Not just money, though that is part of it, but a chance to be part of something larger, to make a mark on history. The silk cocoons aren't just contraband. They're seeds of transformation, the beginning of a shift in global economic power that will echo for centuries. It is a seductive vision, and Jiang Wei finds himself buying into it, allowing himself to believe that what he is doing is noble, even heroic, rather than simple treason. But not everyone at the dinner is who they appear to be. One of the guests, a man introduced as a merchant dealing in precious stones, is actually Ashoka, the spy Jiang Wei encountered back in Kucha. Ashoka has been following the caravan, watching, gathering information. He is not working for the Tang Empire, as Jiang Wei feared. He is working for the Tibetan Empire, one of the great powers competing for control of the Silk Road in the 8th century. According to Professor Christopher Beckwith, whose research on the Tibetan Empire reveals its crucial role in Central Asian politics, Tibet in this period was a major player, controlling large sections of the Silk Road and challenging both Tang China and the various Turkic kingdoms for supremacy. The Tibetans were very interested in commercial intelligence, in understanding who was trading what, where money was flowing, what new technologies or goods were becoming available, and they were particularly interested in anything that might shift the balance of power between China and Persia, because any such shift would affect Tibetan strategic interests. Ashoka has identified Jiang Wei as someone carrying important contraband, though he doesn't yet know exactly what. He has also identified Rustam as someone with connections to powerful Persian interests. Put those two facts together, and you have something worth reporting to his Tibetan masters. But Ashoka has complications of his own. He is not actually Tibetan. He was born in Kashmir, the son of a Hindu merchant and a Buddhist mother, and he was recruited by Tibetan intelligence when he was 20 years old, offered wealth and adventure in exchange for his services. For 15 years he has been playing this role, travelling the Silk Road, gathering information, sending reports back to Lhasa. He is good at it. He speaks 6 languages fluently. He can pass as Indian, Tibetan, or even Persian, depending on the situation. He is patient, careful, methodical, but he is also tired, just like Jiang Wei, just like Rustam. Tired of lying, tired of the constant performance, tired of never having a real home or real relationships. He has a wife in Lhasa, a Tibetan woman he barely knows, married for cover, for credibility. They have no children. He is 41 years old, and he is beginning to wonder what he has accomplished with his life. He has sent hundreds of reports, provided countless pieces of intelligence, but has any of it mattered? Has any of it changed anything? Or has he just been a small cog in a vast machine, providing information that was probably already known, or that arrived too late to be useful? These existential questions plague him as he sits at Rustam's cousin's dinner party, smiling and making small talk while he mentally catalogues everyone present, analysing their relationships, their probable business dealings, looking for patterns and connections. This is what his life has become. Even at a social gathering, even drinking wine and eating good food, he can never relax, never just be present in the moment. He is always working, always observing, always calculating. Think about how exhausting that must be. Think about never being able to just be yourself, to drop the mask, to trust anyone completely. That is the price Ashoka has paid for his choice to become a spy, and he is beginning to wonder if it was worth it. As the dinner party continues, a moment occurs that will change everything. Jiang Wei, emboldened by wine and by the conversation about civilization and legacy, says something he shouldn't. He is talking to one of the Persian merchants about silk production, and he mentions casually that the secret of silk isn't really that complicated, that it is mostly about maintaining the right conditions for the silkworms. The Persian merchant, intrigued, asks how Jiang Wei knows this. Jiang Wei realizes his mistake immediately, but it is too late. The words are out there, and Ashoka, sitting 3 seats away, has heard them and understood their significance. Ashoka now knows what Jiang Wei is carrying. Silk production secrets, probably silk moth cocoons, possibly also documentation about cultivation techniques. This is major intelligence, worth a significant reward from his Tibetan masters. But Ashoka faces a decision. If he reports this immediately, Jiang Wei will probably be arrested by Tibetan authorities. The cocoons will be confiscated, and Ashoka will receive his reward. But that would be the end of the story. Alternatively, Ashoka could let the operation proceed, following Jiang Wei and Rustam as they transport the cocoons to wherever they're going, documenting the entire network of people involved. That would provide much more valuable intelligence, revealing not just one smuggler but an entire organization working to break China's silk monopoly. It would also give Ashoka time to consider whether he wants to continue being a spy at all, or whether this might be the moment to make a different choice. That night, after the dinner party, Ashoka makes his decision. He will not report Jiang Wei immediately. Instead, he will follow this operation to its conclusion, documenting everyone involved, understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. But more than that, he has decided that this will be his last assignment. After this, he is done being a spy. He is going to take whatever money he has saved, disappear somewhere the Tibetan intelligence services won't find him, and try to build a real life. It is a dangerous decision, because intelligence services don't like it when their operatives retire. They know too much, their liabilities. But Ashoka doesn't care anymore. He is 41 years old, and he wants to spend whatever years he has left as himself, not as a performance, not as a mask. Think about that choice. Think about deciding that you'd rather risk everything than continue living a lie. It takes courage, the kind of courage that has nothing to do with physical bravery and everything to do with being honest with yourself about what truly matters. The winter passes slowly in Kashgar. Jiang Wei sells more of his silk, building up the cash reserves he'll need for the continuation of the journey. Rustam continues cultivating relationships with the local Persian merchant community, gathering information about conditions further west, ensuring that everything will be ready when they resume travel in the spring. Ashoka watches them both, taking careful note of their meetings, their associates, the flow of money and goods, and the silk moth cocoons survive the winter, tended daily by both Jiang Wei and Rustam, maintained at exactly the right temperature and humidity, despite the cold winds that sweep down from the mountains. In March of 743 AD, as the snow begins to melt in the mountain passes, Jiang Wei's caravan prepares to depart Kashgar for the next stage of the journey, the crossing of the Pamir Mountains. This is the most dangerous section of the entire Silk Road, more dangerous even than the Taklamakan Desert. The Pamirs, sometimes called the roof of the world, include some of the highest mountains on Earth, with passes that reach elevations of over 4,800 meters. The air at these altitudes is thin, making every step an effort, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Temperatures can drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius at night, even in spring. Avalanches are common. Altitude sickness can kill you if you are not acclimatized. And there are no towns, no caravanserais, no places of safety for weeks of travel. According to Dr. Susan Whitfield's research, the Pamir crossing typically took 6 to 8 weeks, depending on conditions and on which specific pass the caravan used. The most common route went through what is now called the Toragat Pass, at an elevation of 3,752 meters, connecting Kashgar with the Fergana Valley on the western side of the Pamirs. Jiang Wei's caravan, now reduced to about 140 people, after some merchants chose to stay in Kashgar rather than risk the mountains, sets out from Kashgar on the 15th day of March. They're carrying less cargo now, because the camels can't handle heavy loads at high altitude. Jiang Wei has sold most of his remaining silk, keeping only 10 bales, the most valuable ones, plus his secret cargo of cocoons. The journey begins well enough. For the first week they're travelling through foothills, gradually gaining elevation, giving the people and animals time to adjust to the thinning air. The landscape is beautiful. Green valleys with rushing streams fed by snowmelt, wildflowers beginning to bloom, the snow-capped peaks of the Pamirs visible in the distance, like jagged teeth against the sky. But as they climb higher, conditions deteriorate. The air gets thinner, colder. Everyone is breathing hard, feeling lightheaded, moving slowly. Some people start showing symptoms of altitude sickness, headaches, nausea, confusion. Jiang Wei has experienced this before on previous journeys, and he knows it can be deadly if not managed carefully. He orders frequent rest stops, encourages everyone to drink plenty of water, watches carefully for anyone showing severe symptoms. On the 12th day out from Kashgar, they reach the approach to the Toragat Pass at about 3,500 meters elevation. The landscape here is stark, beautiful, and terrifying. There are no trees, just rock and snow and ice, the wind howling across barren slopes, the cold so intense it seems to penetrate straight through clothing to the bone. They camp for the night in a sheltered valley using rocks to anchor their tents against the wind, huddling around fires that struggle to burn in the thin air. That night, one of the merchants, a man named Li Chen who joined the caravan back in Dunhuang, dies in his sleep. The altitude, combined with his age, he was 62, was too much for his heart. They can't bury him. The ground is frozen solid, so they build a cairn of stones over his body and leave him there. Another anonymous death on the Silk Road, another life traded for the promise of profit. Jiang Wei performs a brief Buddhist ceremony, burning incense that barely smokes in the thin air, saying prayers he only half remembers. He didn't know Li Chen well, but the man had been part of his caravan, under his protection, and now he is dead. Jiang Wei adds Li Chen's name to the list he keeps in his head, the list of people who've died on his journeys. It is a long list now, and it gets longer with every trip. The crossing of the Torregat Pass itself takes 3 days. 3 days of brutal cold and thin air and exhausting climbing. The camels struggling with every step, the people barely able to breathe, everyone focused on just putting one foot in front of the other. They crest the pass on the morning of the 15th day out from Kashgar, and Jiang Wei stands at the top, at 3,752 meters above sea level, looking out over the western side of the Pamirs toward the Fergana Valley far below, and he feels a moment of pure triumph. They've done it. They've crossed the roof of the world. From here it is downhill to Samarkand. But the descent is almost as dangerous as the ascent. The trail is narrow, winding along cliff edges with drops of hundreds of meters. One wrong step, one stumble, and you fall, and falling means death. They lose 3 camels on the descent, animals that simply lost their footing on icy patches of trail and plunged over the edge, taking their loads with them. One of the loads that is lost contains 2 of Jiang Wei's remaining 10 bales of silk, a loss of over $20,000 in modern terms. But the cocoons survive. Jiang Wei has carried them personally over the pass, refusing to trust them to a camel, carrying the weight himself, despite the altitude and the cold and the exhaustion. Now, with the worst of the journey behind him, he allows himself to believe that this might actually work, that he might actually succeed in delivering these cocoons to Samarkand, that he might actually get his 10,000 gold dinars and go home to his family a wealthy man. But Rustam is worried. He has noticed that Ashoka is still with the caravan, that the supposed gem merchant has made it across the Pamirs despite not appearing to have any actual business in Samarkand or points west. Rustam has extensive experience spotting spies, and everything about Ashoka sets off alarm bells. The way he asks too many questions but never quite seems to be looking for specific answers. The way he is always watching but trying not to seem like he is watching. The way his cover story, buying gems in India to sell in Persia, doesn't quite make sense if you know the actual gem trade. Rustam decides he needs to deal with the Ashoka problem, and he decides to deal with it in the permanent way. He approaches 3 of the caravan guards, men who've worked for him before on previous journeys, men he knows are willing to do unpleasant things for the right price. He offers them 50 gold dinars each, about $40,000 in modern terms, to make Ashoka disappear. He doesn't use those words exactly, but his meaning is clear. The guards accept. They've done this kind of thing before, and 50 gold dinars is more than they'd make in a year of legitimate guard work. Think about how casually Rustam makes this decision. He is ordering a man's death, a man who has done him no direct harm, simply because that man represents a potential threat, and he is doing it without apparent moral struggle, as a simple business decision. This is the dark side of the Silk Road, the side the histories don't often talk about. Murder was common, life was cheap, and men like Rustam did what they had to do to protect their interests. The plan is simple. Wait until the caravan descends to lower altitudes, wait until they're in an area where a body can easily disappear, and then create an accident. Maybe Ashoka's horse throws him, and he hits his head on a rock. Maybe he slips while walking and falls off a trail. Maybe he is attacked by bandits who coincidentally choose him as their target. Any of these stories will be plausible, and no one will investigate too carefully. But Ashoka, who has spent 15 years surviving as a spy in hostile territory, senses danger. He notices the way the 3 guards watch him. He notices Rustam's renewed interest in his presence, and he decides to act first. One night, 3 days after they descend from the pass, while the caravan is camped in a valley on the western side of the Pamirs, Ashoka approaches Jiang Wei privately. They walk away from the camp, out into the darkness, far enough that they can't be overheard. Ashoka tells Jiang Wei everything. He explains that he is a Tibetan spy, or was a Tibetan spy. He is still working out the semantics of his retirement. He explains that he knows about the silk moth cocoons, that he has been following the operation, that he has documented everything, and he explains that Rustam has hired men to kill him, probably within the next few days. Jiang Wei is stunned. His first reaction is panic. If Ashoka knows about the cocoons, if he has been reporting to Tibetan authorities, then Jiang Wei is finished. But Ashoka quickly clarifies. He hasn't reported anything yet. He was planning to follow the operation to its conclusion before filing his final report. But now he has decided not to file a report at all. He is done being a spy. He wants out, and he is willing to trade his silence for Jiang Wei's help in disappearing. Jiang Wei doesn't know what to believe. Is this a trap? Is Ashoka lying, trying to trick him into confessing? But why would he need to? If Ashoka already knows about the cocoons, if he is really a Tibetan spy with documented evidence, he doesn't need a confession. He could just have Jiang Wei arrested. Unless he really is trying to get out, really is offering a deal. Jiang Wei makes a snap decision, the kind of decision you make when you don't have time to think, when you can only rely on instinct. He chooses to believe Ashoka. He tells the spy that yes, he can help him disappear, that when they reach Samarkand, Jiang Wei can introduce him to people who specialize in creating new identities, in helping people vanish. But in return, Ashoka has to warn Jiang Wei about Rustam's plan to kill him, because if Rustam is willing to murder a potential spy, what will he do to Jiang Wei once the cocoons are delivered and Jiang Wei becomes a liability? Ashoka confirms Jiang Wei's worst fear. He has been listening to conversations, reading documents, piecing together information. Rustam has no intention of letting Jiang Wei live once the cocoons are safely delivered. Jiang Wei is going to have an accident, probably somewhere between Samarkand and Merv, somewhere remote where his body won't be found for months, if ever. The 10,000 gold dinars will never be paid, or rather, it will be paid to Jiang Wei's estate with expressions of deep sorrow about the tragic accident that took such a promising merchant's life. Jiang Wei feels sick, not just physically, though the altitude and stress and fear have taken their toll on his body, but emotionally, spiritually sick. He has betrayed his empire for money. He has risked his family's lives. He has gotten men killed, and all for what? So Rustam can murder him and take his cocoons. The absurdity of it, the unfairness, the sheer waste, it is almost too much to process. But Jiang Wei is a survivor. He has made it through 7 Silk Road journeys, through deserts and mountains and bandit attacks and desert crossings. He is not going to die now, not after coming this far. He asks Ashoka if he is willing to help not just escape, but to help Jiang Wei survive, to help him outmaneuver Rustam. Ashoka considers this for a long moment. What Jiang Wei is asking will put Ashoka at significant risk. If Rustam realizes that Ashoka is working against him, the assassination attempt will shift to both of them. But Ashoka has already decided that his days of playing it safe are over. If he is going to change his life, if he is going to stop being a spy and become a real person, he might as well start now. He agrees. They shake hands there in the darkness. 2 men who've spent their lives lying and scheming, trying awkwardly to trust each other, to form an alliance based on mutual need and a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time things will work out differently. Over the next week, as the caravan continues its descent toward the Fergana Valley, Jiang Wei and Ashoka quietly work out their plan. The key is the cocoons. As long as Rustam needs Jiang Wei's expertise to keep the cocoons alive, Jiang Wei is valuable, protected. The danger comes after the cocoons are delivered, when Jiang Wei's usefulness ends. So Jiang Wei decides not to deliver all the cocoons. He'll keep back 3 of them, the healthiest 3, and he'll hide them in a location known only to him and Ashoka. He'll deliver the other 18 to Rustam in Samarkand, claiming that 3 died during the Pamir crossing. 18 cocoons are enough to establish a silk production operation if handled correctly, so Rustam won't be too upset by the loss. But Jiang Wei will retain the 3 as insurance, as leverage. If Rustam tries to kill him, the information about the hidden cocoons can be sent to Chinese authorities, along with details of Rustam's entire operation. It is not a perfect plan. There are a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it is better than walking blindly into an assassination. Ashoka contributes his own expertise to the plan. He knows people in Samarkand, not Tibetan intelligence, people but contacts from his old life before he became a spy, people who operate in the grey areas of commerce and law, people who can help Jiang Wei get his money, not all 10,000 gold dinars but enough, and then help him disappear before Rustam's hired killers can find him. People who can give Ashoka a new identity and papers that will allow him to travel to India or Persia or anywhere he wants to start a new life. The caravan reaches the Fergana Valley 6 weeks after leaving Kashgar, descending from the frozen heights of the Pamirs into a landscape that seems impossibly green and fertile after months of rock and sand and ice. The Fergana Valley, according to Professor Sibien de Lavassier, was one of the great agricultural regions of Central Asia, famous for its horses, its fruits, and its prosperous cities. The air here smells of orchards in bloom, of fresh grass, of life returning after the brutal mountain crossing. Jiang Wei allows himself to relax slightly, to believe that perhaps the worst is over. But he is wrong. The worst is yet to come. The caravan spends 2 weeks travelling through the Fergana Valley, stopping at several towns to rest and resupply. Jiang Wei uses this time to quietly execute the first phase of his plan with Ashoka. They select 3 of the healthiest silk moth cocoons and carefully transfer them to a specially prepared container Ashoka has acquired. Then, during a stop at the town of Andijan, Ashoka takes the 3 cocoons and disappears for half a day. When he returns, he tells Jiang Wei that the cocoons are safely hidden in a location that only he knows, entrusted to people who will care for them according to detailed instructions. If anything happens to Jiang Wei or Ashoka, the cocoons and full documentation of Rustam's smuggling operation will be delivered to Chinese authorities in Kashgar. It is their insurance policy, their leverage against Rustam's planned betrayal. From the Fergana Valley, the caravan continues west towards Samarkand, following the Zarafshan River through increasingly settled and prosperous lands. This is Sogdiana, the heartland of the Sogdian merchant culture that dominates Silk Road trade in the 8th century. The landscape is different from anything Jiang Wei has seen before on his journeys. Instead of empty deserts or isolated oases, there are farms and villages and towns, linked by good roads, protected by local rulers, who understand that their wealth depends on encouraging trade. According to Professor Frantz Grenet from the Collège de France, Sogdiana in this period was experiencing a golden age, its cities growing wealthy from their position at the crossroads of east-west trade, its merchants operating sophisticated banking networks that facilitated commerce across thousands of kilometers. The caravan reaches Samarkand in early June of 743 AD, 7.5 months after leaving Chang'an. Samarkand is magnificent, a city of perhaps 100,000 people, with broad streets, impressive public buildings, beautiful gardens, and bustling markets that make even Kashgar seem provincial by comparison. The city is a true melting pot, with substantial communities of Sogdians, Persians, Arabs, Turks, Chinese, Indians, and even a few Europeans. According to Dr. Matteo Comperati from Ca' Foscari University, archaeological evidence shows that Samarkand in the 8th century had Buddhist temples, Zoroastrian fire temples, Christian churches, and early mosques, all coexisting in relative harmony, a level of religious diversity that is remarkable by any standard. Jiang Wei checks into one of the finest caravanserais in Samarkand, a massive complex that can accommodate up to 500 travellers, with separate sections for different merchant communities, its own bathhouses, and a market where traders from across the world come to do business. He is exhausted, bone-tired from the journey, but he can't rest yet. He needs to deliver the cocoons to Rustam, collect his payment, and then execute his escape plan before Rustam's assassins can act. That evening, Jiang Wei meets with Rustam in a private room at the caravanserai. Jiang Wei brings the container with 18 silk moth cocoons, carefully maintained throughout the entire journey. Rustam examines them with the intensity of a man whose entire future depends on these fragile insects. He holds each cocoon up to the light, checking for any sign of damage, counting them carefully. When he has finished, he looks up at Jiang Wei with an expression that is hard to read. 18, Rustam says. We started with 23. What happened to the other 5? Jiang Wei was prepared for this question. 2 died during the Taklamakan crossing, he says. The heat was too much despite our best efforts. 3 more died in the Pamirs. The altitude, the cold. I couldn't maintain the right conditions. I am sorry. But 18 is more than enough to establish a breeding population if handled correctly. Rustam is silent for a long moment, studying Jiang Wei's face, looking for signs of deception. Jiang Wei forces himself to maintain eye contact, to keep his expression neutral and honest. He is a good liar after all these years on the Silk Road, but Rustam is an expert at detecting lies. Finally, Rustam nods. 18 will have to do, he says. You've done well, Jiang Wei. You've accomplished something remarkable. These cocoons will change the world, change the balance of trade between East and West. Your name will be remembered. But as Rustam says these words, Jiang Wei can see the calculation in his eyes. The cold assessment of whether Jiang Wei is now more valuable alive or dead. And Jiang Wei knows, with absolute certainty, that Rustam has already decided. Jiang Wei is too dangerous to leave alive. He knows too much, he has seen too much. He could be captured and interrogated by Chinese authorities. The risk is too great. Rustam continues, I've arranged for your payment, 10,000 gold dinars as promised, but it is too much to carry as actual coins or bullion. Most of it will be in the form of letters of credit, payable at banking houses in Chang'an. You'll be able to collect the full amount when you return home. In the meantime, I'll give you 500 gold dinars in cash, enough for your journey home and to live well once you arrive. This is exactly what Jiang Wei expected. Letters of credit that will never be honoured because Jiang Wei will be dead before he can present them. 500 gold dinars in cash that Rustam's assassins will take back after they kill him. It is almost insulting in its transparency, but Jiang Wei plays along. He thanks Rustam profusely, expresses his gratitude for the opportunity, accepts the letters of credit and the bag of gold coins. They drink wine together, toasting their successful partnership, both men knowing that this partnership will end with one of them dead. According to Professor Valerie Hansen, this kind of double dealing was unfortunately common in high-stakes Silk Road trade. The profits were enormous, but so were the risks, and men who dealt in contraband or highly valuable goods often ended up betraying their partners rather than sharing the wealth. Trust was a luxury that few could afford. The next morning, Jiang Wei begins executing his escape plan. Ashoka has arranged a meeting with his contacts in Samarkand, men who specialize in helping people disappear. Their services are expensive, 2,000 gold dinars, nearly half of what Jiang Wei received in cash from Rustam. But the alternative is death, so the price is acceptable. These men provide Jiang Wei with a new identity, papers that identify him as a Persian merchant named Dariush, complete with backstory, trading licenses, and letters of introduction to merchants in various cities. They also provide Ashoka with a new identity as an Indian scholar named Vikram, travelling to Persia to study at the libraries of Baghdad. Both identities are well crafted, with enough documentation to pass casual inspection. Though they wouldn't survive serious investigation by authorities, the plan is for Jiang Wei and Ashoka to leave Samarkand separately, travelling by different routes, and meet again in the city of Merv, Rustam's home city. Why Merv? Because it is the last place anyone would expect them to go, right into the heart of Rustam's territory, and because Ashoka has contacts there who can help them access the banking system to convert some of Jiang Wei's remaining cash into more portable forms of wealth. But before they can leave, Rustam makes his move. On their third night in Samarkand, Jiang Wei is attacked in his room at the caravanserai. 3 men, the same 3 guards that Rustam hired, come for him in the darkness. They're armed with knives, intending to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, just another merchant killed by thieves in a strange city. But Jiang Wei isn't in his room. He and Ashoka, anticipating this exact scenario, have swapped rooms with two other merchants, paying them handsomely to sleep elsewhere for the night. When the assassins break into what they think is Jiang Wei's room, they find themselves facing Ashoka and 4 professional fighters that Ashoka has hired, men who've been waiting for exactly this moment. The fight is short and brutal. 2 of Rustam's assassins are killed immediately. The third is captured alive. Ashoka interrogates him using methods that are effective if not pleasant, and the man confirms everything they suspected. Rustam ordered them to kill Jiang Wei and make it look like a robbery. They were supposed to recover the 500 gold dinars and return it to Rustam, who would then express deep sorrow at Jiang Wei's tragic death and send condolences to his family. Think about the psychology of this moment. Jiang Wei is listening to this confession, hearing in explicit detail how Rustam, a man he'd begun to think of almost as a friend, had planned his murder. The betrayal is complete, and it hardens something in Jiang Wei's heart. He realizes that he can never go home to Chang'an, can never see his wife and children again, because if he does, Rustam's people or Chinese authorities will eventually find him. He has committed treason against his empire, stolen state secrets, and there is no statute of limitations on that kind of crime. His old life is over permanently. Everything he has done, all the risks he has taken, all the people who've died, it was all for nothing. He can't go home. He can't collect his 10,000 gold dinars. He can't use his wealth to give his family a better life. He is effectively a ghost now, a man with a new name and no past, destined to wander the Silk Road forever, or until someone finally kills him. The next morning, Jiang Wei and Ashoka leave Samarkand separately, as planned. Jiang Wei, now Dariush the Persian merchant, joins a caravan heading west toward Merv and Persia. Ashoka, now Vikram the scholar, travels south toward India, planning to circle around and meet Jiang Wei in Merv in 6 weeks. Before they part, they embrace, 2 men who've saved each other's lives, who've formed an unlikely friendship based on mutual betrayal of their former lives. "Good luck, my friend," Ashoka says. "May your new life be better than your old one, and yours as well," Jiang Wei replies. "Perhaps in another life, we could have been honest men." Meanwhile, Rustam is dealing with his own crisis. His 3 assassins failed to kill Jiang Wei, and 2 of them are dead. The third is missing, probably captured. This means Jiang Wei knows about the assassination attempt, which means he is going to run, and he is going to do everything he can to hurt Rustam on his way out. Rustam's first thought is the cocoons. He rushes to the secure location where he has stored them, fearing that Jiang Wei might have stolen them back. But the 18 cocoons are still there, safe and healthy. Rustam breathes a sigh of relief. He has what he needs. Jiang Wei's betrayal is annoying, but ultimately it doesn't matter. The cocoons are what is important, and Rustam has them, or does he? Over the next few weeks, as Rustam begins the delicate process of attempting to cultivate the cocoons, to get the silk moths to emerge and breed and produce a new generation of silkworms, he runs into problems. Despite following all the procedures that Jiang Wei had described, despite maintaining exactly the right temperature and humidity, despite hiring the best available experts in insect cultivation, the cocoons aren't hatching properly. Out of 18 cocoons, only 3 produce viable moths, and of those 3, only 1 successfully mates and lays eggs. The operation that was supposed to establish Persian silk production, that was supposed to make Rustam's fortune and secure his legacy, is failing. Rustam realizes with growing horror that Jiang Wei must have given him damaged or inferior cocoons, keeping the best ones for himself. But where are those cocoons? Where is Jiang Wei? Rustam sends men to search for him, offering substantial rewards for information, but Jiang Wei has disappeared completely. His new identity as Dariush is good enough that casual investigation reveals nothing. Rustam considers reporting the theft to Chinese authorities, but that would require admitting his own role in the smuggling operation, which would likely get him executed. He is trapped by his own deception, unable to pursue Jiang Wei without destroying himself. According to Professor Richard Foltz, this kind of outcome was actually fairly common in Silk Road smuggling operations. The complexity of maintaining secrecy, combined with the high stakes and the difficulty of enforcing agreements in a world without reliable legal systems, meant that many operations failed or ended in mutual betrayal. The few that succeeded did so largely by luck as much as planning. In Merv, 6 weeks after leaving Samarkand, Jiang Wei and Ashoka reunite at a small caravanserai on the outskirts of the city. They're both relieved to see each other alive. They compare notes, share what they've learned, and make plans for their futures. The 3 silk moth cocoons that they hid are still safe, still viable, but neither of them wants to try to establish silk production. The risks are too great, the technical challenges too complex. Instead, they decide to sell the cocoons to the highest bidder, splitting the proceeds and going their separate ways. Through Ashoka's contacts, they find a buyer, a wealthy Arab merchant with connections to the Umayyad Caliphate, willing to pay 3,000 gold dinars for the 3 cocoons. It is far less than the 10,000 that Rustam promised Jiang Wei, but it is still a fortune, and it is real money that I can actually collect. They make the sale, split the proceeds, 1,500 gold dinars each, and prepare to part ways. Jiang Wei plans to travel to Persia, perhaps settle in a smaller city where he won't be noticed, live quietly on his money, try to build some kind of life. He'll never see his family again, never hold his wife or children, never return to Chang'an. But he'll be alive and he'll be free, and after everything he has been through, that seems like enough. Ashoka plans to travel to India, to Kashmir where he was born, see if any of his family is still alive, try to reconnect with his roots. He has spent 15 years being someone else, and he wants to remember what it feels like to be himself. They shake hands one last time, wish each other luck, and walk away in opposite directions. Jiang Wei heading west into Persia, Ashoka heading east toward India. 2 men who came together because of mutual need, who survived because they chose to trust each other, despite everything their lives had taught them about the dangers of trust, now parting forever, carrying their secrets with them. What really gets to me about this story is how it mirrors the essential tragedy of the Silk Road. These merchants, these incredible, courageous people who crossed deserts and mountains, who risked everything for profit and adventure, so many of them ended up alone, separated from their families, never quite belonging anywhere, carrying secrets they could never share. They built the first global economy. They connected civilizations. They spread ideas and technologies that changed the world. But the personal cost was immense. But let me take you beyond these 3 men, because the Silk Road was filled with thousands of similar stories, each one a universe of hope and tragedy, courage and betrayal. Let me tell you about Yusuf al-Rashid, an Arab perfume trader who traveled the Silk Road in the 750s AD, carrying precious essences from Arabia to China. Yusuf was born in Damascus in 718 AD, the son of a perfume maker whose shop was famous throughout Syria for its exquisite fragrances, rose oil and jasmine and musk compounded into scents that wealthy women would pay fortunes for. Yusuf learned the trade from his father, developing a sensitive nose that could detect the subtlest variations in fragrance, distinguish between oils made from flowers harvested at dawn versus those harvested at midday, determine the quality and provenance of ingredients just by scent. By the time he was 30, Yusuf had taken over his father's business and expanded it dramatically, establishing contacts with suppliers throughout Arabia and Persia, creating new fragrances that became fashionable in the Umayyad court. But Yusuf wanted more. He'd heard stories about China, about the Tang court where perfumes were even more valued than in Arabia, where a single bottle of rare essence could sell for prices that seemed almost unbelievable. He decided to make the journey himself, to bring his perfumes directly to the Chinese market, cutting out the Sogdian and Persian middlemen who'd been profiting from his work. In 748 AD, at age 30, Yusuf set out from Damascus with a caravan carrying his precious cargo, hundreds of small bottles of perfume, each one carefully wrapped and packed to prevent breakage. each one representing months of work and costs equivalent to thousands of dollars in modern terms. The journey from Damascus to Chang'an by the Silk Road is even longer than the route from Chang'an westward, approximately 8,500 kilometers, taking 2 to 3 years if everything goes well. According to Professor Jonathan Bloom from Boston College, whose research on Islamic trade illuminates the crucial role of Arab merchants in connecting the Mediterranean world with East Asia, Arab traders like Yusuf were relatively rare on the eastern sections of the Silk Road in the 8th century, before the Islamic expansion had fully integrated Central Asia. Most Arab goods reached China through Persian and Sogdian intermediaries, so Yusuf's decision to travel personally was unusual and risky. The journey started well. Yusuf's caravan made good progress through Persia, through the great cities of Isfahan and Merv, following routes that were relatively safe and well-travelled. But everything changed when they reached the Pamirs. Yusuf, who'd lived his entire life in the relatively mild climate of Syria, was completely unprepared for the brutal cold of the mountain crossing. Despite having the best equipment money could buy, despite travelling with experienced guides, he suffered severe frostbite on his feet during the pass crossing, damage so bad that he lost 3 toes on his left foot and 2 on his right. The physical damage was bad enough, but the psychological impact was worse. Yusuf, who'd prided himself on his elegance and grace, who'd been something of a dandy in Damascus society, now walked with a pronounced limp, his ruined feet a constant source of pain. But he continued the journey because turning back would mean financial ruin. He'd invested everything in this venture, and he had to see it through. Yusuf finally reached Chang'an in the spring of 750 AD, nearly 2 years after leaving Damascus. The city amazed him. It was larger, wealthier, more sophisticated than anything he'd experienced even in Damascus. The Tang court, with its elaborate ceremonies and its obsession with luxury goods, seemed like the perfect market for his perfumes. But Yusuf made a critical error. He didn't understand Chinese culture well enough, didn't know the right people, didn't know how to navigate the complex social and bureaucratic systems that governed access to the court. He'd assumed that his perfumes, which were the finest in the world by Arab standards, would speak for themselves. But in Tang China, connections mattered more than quality, and Yusuf had no connections. He spent months in Chang'an, trying to find buyers, trying to get meetings with court officials, burning through his cash reserves. He sold some perfume, enough to survive, but nothing like the quantities or prices he'd expected. The Chinese, he discovered, had their own perfume traditions, their own standards of quality, and they weren't particularly interested in Arab scents. What they wanted was exotic ingredients that they could incorporate into their own formulations, not finished products. By the time Yusuf accepted this reality and adapted his business model, he'd been in Chang'an for 18 months and had depleted most of his capital. He managed to sell his remaining stock at a modest profit, enough to pay for his journey home, but not the fortune he'd dreamed of. He left Chang'an in the fall of 751 AD, emotionally exhausted and physically damaged, his feet still causing him constant pain, his dreams of wealth and success shattered. The journey home took another 2 years. Yusuf reached Damascus in 753 AD, 5 years after he'd left, to find that everything had changed. His wife, who he'd left pregnant, had given birth to a son and then died of complications 2 years earlier. His son, now 5 years old, was being raised by Yusuf's sister and didn't recognize his father. His perfume shop had been sold to pay debts. His father had died while Yusuf was away. Everything he'd left behind was gone. Yusuf was 45 years old, crippled, broke, and alone. He tried to rebuild his life, tried to reconnect with his son, tried to restart his perfume business. But he was a changed man. The optimism and confidence he'd had before the journey was gone, replaced by a deep weariness and cynicism. He'd seen too much, suffered too much, lost too much. According to records from Damascus, Yusuf died in 768 AD at age 50, still struggling financially, still estranged from his son. his dreams of Silk Road success having destroyed rather than made his life. Think about the tragedy of that story. Yusuf wasn't a bad man, he wasn't dishonest or cruel. He was just ambitious, willing to take risks to improve his life. And the Silk Road destroyed him, not through any single catastrophe, but through 1,000 small cuts, the cumulative weight of hardship and disappointment and loss. Let me tell you one more story, about a woman whose name we actually know from historical records. Her name was Mune, and she was a Sogdian merchant's wife who lived in the early 8th century. We know about Mune because of an extraordinary archaeological discovery, a collection of letters written in the Sogdian language, found in a watchtower along the Silk Road near Dunhuang, preserved by the dry desert climate for 1,300 years. These letters, known to scholars as the Sogdian Ancient Letters, provide rare insight into the lives of Silk Road merchants and their families. According to Dr. Nicholas Sims Williams from the University of London, who translated and analysed these letters, they represent some of the most valuable sources we have for understanding the human reality of Silk Road trade. One of the letters is from Mune to her husband, a merchant who'd left Dunhuang travelling east toward China and had been gone for years. The letter is heartbreaking in its directness and its emotion. Mune writes that she is destitute, that her husband abandoned her without adequate support, that she is barely surviving. She describes how she had to sell her clothing to buy food, how she is living in desperate poverty. She begs her husband to either send money or give her permission to remarry so she can have some source of support. The letter was never delivered. We don't know why. Perhaps the merchant died before it could reach him. Perhaps the courier who was carrying it was killed or simply abandoned it. But the letter survived, and it tells us something important about the Silk Road that the grand historical narratives often miss. But let me take you deeper into Mune's world, because her story represents thousands of women whose voices have been lost to history. Mune was born in approximately 695 AD in the Sogdian city of Samarkand, into a merchant family of moderate prosperity. Her father dealt in glassware, importing finished pieces from Syria and Persia, selling them to wealthy Chinese customers who valued the clarity and craftsmanship of Western glass over local productions. According to Dr. Valerie Hansen's research on Sogdian trading communities, families like Mune's occupied a middle position in Sogdian society, not as wealthy as the great merchant houses that traded in silk and precious metals, but comfortable, respected, part of the commercial network that made Samarkand one of the great cities of the early medieval world. Mune's childhood was typical for a Sogdian merchant's daughter. She was educated, taught to read and write Sogdian and to do basic arithmetic, skills that were unusual for women in many cultures, but relatively common among Sogdian merchant families, who understood that literate women could help manage business affairs when their husbands were travelling. She learned to weave, to embroider, to manage a household, to receive guests with proper hospitality. She grew up hearing stories from merchants who travelled to China, to Persia, to India, stories of exotic cities and strange customs and fortunes made and lost. When Mune was 16 in the year 711 AD, her family arranged her marriage to a man named Nanai Dat, a Sogdian merchant 15 years her senior who specialized in trading in Central Asian horses, selling them to Chinese military buyers who needed constant supplies of cavalry mounts. It was a good match by Sogdian standards. Nanai Dat's family was well established in Dunhuang, the crucial trading city at the eastern edge of the Tarim Basin, and the marriage would create commercial connections between Mune's family in Samarkand and Nanai Dat's network in Dunhuang. The wedding took place in Samarkand, a 3-day celebration with hundreds of guests, music and dancing and feasting, the kind of display that demonstrated both families' social status. Mune wore a robe of red silk embroidered with golden flowers, a gift from her new husband's family. She was given jewellery, household goods, and a substantial dowry that would remain her property even in marriage. And then, 3 weeks after the wedding, she left Samarkand with her new husband, travelling east toward Dunhuang, a journey of approximately 2,000 kilometers that would take 3 months. Think about what that journey must have been like for a 16-year-old girl leaving her home for the first time, traveling toward a city she'd never seen, with a man she barely knew, understanding that she would probably never return to Samarkand, that she was leaving her mother and father and siblings forever. This was the price of being a Silk Road merchant's wife. Your life was defined by separation, by distance, by loss. Munay and Nanai, that arrived in Dunhuang in late 711 AD, and for the first few years their marriage seemed to work reasonably well by the standards of the time. Nanai Dat was often away on trading journeys, sometimes for months at a time, travelling west to Kashgar and Turfan to buy horses, travelling east to Liangzhou and Chang'an to sell them, but he came home regularly, usually spending several months in Dunhuang between journeys. He was a good provider, their household was comfortable, and Munay gave birth to 3 children in the first 5 years of their marriage, 2 daughters and a son. According to research by Dr. Thidiane de la Versia on Sogdian family structures, this pattern was typical. Wives managed the household and raised children while husbands travelled for business, but there was an expectation that husbands would return regularly, that they would maintain their responsibilities to their families. The system worked as long as both parties upheld their obligations. But in 717 AD, something changed. Nanai Dat left Dunhuang on what he said would be a routine trading journey to Chang'an, promising to return in 6 months. 6 months passed. Then a year, then 2 years. Munay received no word from him, no money, no letters, nothing. She was left with 3 small children, a household to maintain, and dwindling resources. At first, she used the savings Nanai that had left, assuming he'd been delayed but would return soon. But as the months turned into years, she realized something more serious had happened. He'd either died on the road, or he'd chosen not to return. The social and economic implications of this abandonment were devastating for Munay. As a married woman, she couldn't remarry without her husband's permission, or without proof of his death. She couldn't inherit his property or conduct business in her own name. She was in legal and social limbo, neither wife nor widow, with 3 children to support and no legitimate way to earn money. According to Dr. Valerie Hansen's analysis of the Sogdian legal codes, abandoned wives were in one of the most vulnerable positions in Sogdian society. They had responsibilities, children to feed and house to maintain, but they had no rights, no legal standing to act independently. Munay's situation grew increasingly desperate. She sold her jewellery first, the gifts from her wedding, the pieces her mother had given her. This bought her perhaps 6 months. Then she sold the household furniture, the carpets, the decorative items, anything that wasn't absolutely essential for survival. Another 6 months. Then she sold her clothing, keeping only the most basic garments. She moved from the comfortable house in the merchant's quarter to smaller, cheaper lodgings. She sought help from Nanai Dat's family in Dunhuang, but they were distant, unhelpful, perhaps embarrassed by the situation, or unwilling to support a woman who wasn't technically a widow and therefore still had claims on their family resources. By 720 AD, 3 years after Nanai Dat's departure, Munay was living in poverty, struggling to feed her children, desperate for any solution. It was at this point that she wrote the letter that would survive for 1,300 years, discovered by archaeologists in 1907 in a watchtower near Dunhuang. The letter is written in Sogdian, on a piece of paper, the script neat and practiced, evidence of Munay's education. The translation, according to Dr. Sims Williams, reads in part, "I would rather be a dog's or a pig's wife than yours. When you left, you did not think of me, nor did you leave me any money. You left me in Dunhuang without even the clothes on my back. I have sold everything I own to buy food for myself and the children. Now I have nothing left. The children are hungry and crying. I beg you, if you are alive, send money. If you have taken another wife and wish to stay with her, send me a letter of divorce so I can remarry. I am destitute. I will die if you do not respond." The rawness of that letter, the anger and desperation and pain it reaches across 13 centuries and touches something universal. This is what the Silk Road meant for countless women like Monet. Not adventure or profit or exotic travel, but abandonment, poverty, and helplessness. The letter was never delivered. We found it in a watchtower, which suggests the messenger who was carrying it either died or abandoned his mission. We don't know what happened to Monet. We don't know if Nanai, that was dead or had simply chosen to stay away. We don't know if Monet's children survived, if she managed to remarry, if she died in poverty in Dunhuang. Her story simply ends with this letter, this cry for help that echoed into silence. But here is what we do know from broader historical records. According to Professor Xingru Lu's research, approximately 40% of Sogdian merchant marriages ended in de facto abandonment, with husbands simply not returning from trading journeys. Some of these men died on the road, killed by bandits or disease or natural disasters, but many simply established new families in distant cities, taking advantage of the vast distances and slow communication to maintain multiple households, or choosing to start over somewhere new, rather than return to old obligations. For the women left behind, the consequences were often catastrophic. Without legal standing, without economic resources, without male protection in societies that were deeply patriarchal, they often descended into poverty. Some managed to return to their birth families if those families would take them. Some found ways to work, often in socially marginal occupations. Some remarried without permission, living in irregular unions that had no legal protection, and some simply didn't survive. Think about Monet's letter every time you hear about the romance and adventure of the Silk Road. Think about the women who wrote letters that were never delivered, who waited for husbands who never returned, who raised children alone in poverty while their husbands were pursuing profit and adventure in distant lands. Their suffering was the hidden cost of global trade, the price that someone always pays for commerce and connection. Now let me take you to a different kind of Silk Road story, one that reveals another hidden truth about this world. This is the story of a man named Bai Zhou, a Chinese soldier who served in the Tang military garrison at Kashgar in the 750s AD, and who ended up becoming something very different from what he started as. Bai Zhou was born in 729 AD in a small farming village in Shanxi province in the heartland of Tang China, the son of a peasant farmer who worked a small plot of land. According to research by Professor David Graff from Kansas State University, whose work on Tang military recruitment provides crucial insights into how the empire maintained its garrisons along the Silk Road, young men like Bai Zhou were conscripted into military service at age 20, required to serve for 2 years either in their home province or at frontier garrisons. Bai Zhou was conscripted in 749 AD at age 20, and he was assigned to a unit being sent to Kashgar, a strategic city on the western edge of the Tang sphere of influence, a place that was nominally under Tang control, but in reality was contested territory where Tang, Tibetan, and Arab interests all competed. The journey from Bai Zhou's village to Kashgar took 7 months, marching west along the same route that merchants travelled, through the Hexi corridor, across the Taklamakan desert, over mountain passes. Many of the conscripts died on the journey, from disease, from exhaustion, from accidents. Bai Zhou survived, and he arrived in Kashgar in early 750 AD, a 20-year-old farm boy who'd never been more than 50 kilometers from his village before this journey. Now, stationed in a cosmopolitan city of 50,000 people, where dozens of languages were spoken, and where he was supposed to help maintain Tang authority, Kashgar was a revelation for Bai Zhou. His home village had been entirely Chinese, entirely familiar. Kashgar was a babel of cultures, Sogdians and Persians and Turks and Indians and Arabs and Chinese, all mixing in the bazaars, all speaking different languages, all wearing different clothes, all following different customs. The garrison where Bai Zhou was stationed was on the outskirts of the city, a walled compound housing about 500 Tang soldiers, commanded by a colonel who reported to the regional military governor in Kucha. The garrison's official mission was to protect Tang merchants, to collect taxes from trade, and to maintain order. Its actual function was more complicated, according to Professor Jonathan Karam-Scaff from Shippensburg University, whose research on Tang frontier military administration reveals the complex reality of these garrisons. Soldiers like Bai Zhou spent most of their time on guard duty, patrols, and what we might call civil administration, mediating disputes between merchants, inspecting cargo, collecting fees. It was boring, bureaucratic work, punctuated occasionally by moments of terror when bandits attacked or when tensions with local populations boiled over into violence. Bai Zhou's 2-year term of service passed in this routine. He learned enough Sogdian to communicate with local people. He learned the rhythms of the city. He adapted to the different food and climate. And when his 2 years were up in 752 AD, he faced a choice. He could return to his village in Shanxi, go back to farming, live the life his father had lived, or he could extend his service, becoming a professional soldier, staying in Kashgar, continuing this strange new life in a world utterly different from anything he'd known before. Bai Zhou chose to stay. Not because he particularly loved military service, but because going back to the village felt impossible after what he'd experienced. How could he return to ploughing fields and planting millet after living in Kashgar? After seeing the caravans arrive from Persia loaded with silver and glassware, after hearing musicians playing instruments he'd never imagined existed, after tasting food flavoured with spices that didn't exist in China, the village would feel like a prison, small and limited and suffocating. So he signed on for another term, and then another, and he became one of those long-service frontier soldiers who made the garrison system work, who provided continuity and local knowledge that short-term conscripts couldn't offer. According to Professor Graff's research, about 20% of conscripted soldiers chose to extend their service and stay at frontier garrisons, creating a core of experienced men who often served for 10 or 20 years, who married local women, who became part of the communities where they were stationed. Bai Zhou followed this pattern. In 754 AD, at age 25, he married a Sogdian woman named Wiyush, the daughter of a local merchant who dealt in cotton textiles. It was an unusual match, a Chinese soldier and a Sogdian merchant's daughter, crossing cultural and class boundaries. But it worked because both of them were pragmatic. Wiyush's father wanted connections to the Tang military, and Bai Zhou wanted to establish himself in Kashgar society. They had a small wedding, mostly Wiyushka's family and Bai Zhou's fellow soldiers, and they set up household in a small house near the garrison, a place that was neither fully Chinese nor fully Sogdian, but something in between. Over the next decade, Bai Zhou and Wiyush built a life together. They had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. Bai Zhou continued his military service, rising to the rank of sergeant, commanding a squad of 10 men, earning a respectable, if not lavish, salary. But he also became involved in trade, using his military connections to help merchants navigate the complex bureaucracy of Tang customs and taxation, taking commissions for his services. This kind of side business was officially forbidden, but universally practiced. According to Dr. Valerie Hansen's research, Tang soldiers at frontier garrisons routinely supplemented their military pay with commercial activities, acting as intermediaries between merchants and officials, sometimes engaging in trade themselves. The line between soldier and merchant was porous, and men like Bai Zhou crossed it constantly. By the time Bai Zhou was 35 in 764 AD, he was more Kashgar resident than Chinese soldier. He spoke Sogdian fluently, better than he spoke Chinese. His children were growing up bilingual and bicultural. His primary income came from his commercial facilitation work rather than his military salary. He'd been in Kashgar for 14 years, far longer than he'd lived anywhere else. When people asked him where he was from, he no longer said Shanxi. He said Kashgar. He'd become one of those in-between people, not fully Chinese anymore, but not Sogdian either. existing in the cultural borderlands that the Silk Road created. But in 764 AD, everything changed. The Tang Empire, weakened by the catastrophic and Lushan rebellion that had devastated China from 755 to 763 AD, began withdrawing from its Central Asian territories, unable to maintain the military presence necessary to control the Tarim Basin. According to Professor Christopher Beckwith's research on the Tibetan Empire's expansion, Tibetan forces moved into the vacuum left by Tang withdrawal, conquering city after city in the Tarim Basin. Kashgar fell to Tibetan control in late 764 AD after a brief siege that the undermanned and demoralized Tang garrison couldn't withstand. Baizhou found himself facing another choice. The Tibetan commanders offered Tang soldiers two options: return to China under a negotiated truce, or stay in Kashgar as civilians under Tibetan rule. Most of the Tang soldiers chose to return to China, accepting the long, dangerous journey home after years of service. But Baizhou chose to stay. His wife and children were in Kashgar. His business connections were there. His life was there. China was a distant memory, and he had nothing waiting for him in Shaanxi, except maybe a small family farm that had probably been destroyed or abandoned during the rebellion. So Baizhou took off his Tang military uniform for the last time, turned in his weapons and armor, and became officially a civilian, a merchant facilitator living under Tibetan rule. The transition was surprisingly smooth for him personally. The Tibetans were interested in maintaining the flow of trade, and they recognized the value of people like Baizhou, who understood both Chinese and Central Asian commercial networks. Baizhou continued his work as an intermediary, now facilitating trade under Tibetan rather than Tang authority, and his business actually expanded because there was less competition after the Tang military withdrew. Baizhou lived in Kashgar for another 31 years, dying in 795 at age 66, a respected elder in the city's merchant community. His children grew up as Kashgari citizens, speaking Sogdian and Chinese and some Tibetan, working in trade, marrying into local families. His eldest son became a successful textile merchant. His daughter married a Persian merchant from Merv. His grandchildren probably never thought of themselves as Chinese at all. They were children of the Silk Road, products of the cultural mixing and adaptation that defined life along these trade routes. According to Professor Hansen's research, stories like Baizhou's were common. Thousands of Chinese soldiers and officials who stayed in Central Asia after the Tang withdrawal, who became absorbed into local populations, who created the kind of multicultural, multilingual communities that made long-distance trade possible. These were the people who actually made the Silk Road work, not the famous explorers or powerful merchants, but the ordinary people who learned to navigate between cultures, who could translate languages and customs, who understood that survival depended on adaptation and flexibility. Think about what Baizhou's story tells us about identity and belonging. He started as a Chinese peasant farmer, became a Chinese soldier, then became a Kashgari merchant, shifting identities as his circumstances changed. Which identity was real? All of them, and none of them. He was whoever he needed to be to survive and thrive in the moment, and by the end of his life, he was a synthesis of all these identities, a person who couldn't be contained by any single cultural category. This kind of fluid, adaptive identity was essential for success on the Silk Road. People who clung too rigidly to their original culture, who refused to adapt, often failed or died. The survivors were the chameleons, the people who could be Chinese in Chinese contexts, and Sogdian in Sogdian contexts, and Tibetan in Tibetan contexts, who understood that culture was a tool for navigation rather than an essence that defined who you were. Sound familiar? We live in a similarly globalized world today, where success often depends on cultural fluency, on being able to code switch between different social contexts, on adapting our presentation and behavior to different audiences. The technology is different, but the human skills required are remarkably similar. Now let me take you deeper into the actual mechanics of Silk Road trade. because beyond all these personal stories, there was a complex commercial infrastructure that made long-distance trade possible. Let me tell you about the banking system, the credit networks, the partnerships and contracts that connected merchants across thousands of kilometers. According to research by Professor Michael Moroney from UCLA, whose work on early Islamic commercial practices illuminates the broader patterns of Silk Road finance. Merchants in the 8th and 9th centuries had developed sophisticated financial instruments that allowed them to move value across vast distances without physically transporting gold or silver, which would have been impossibly dangerous and expensive. The key innovation was the saftaja, a financial instrument that was essentially a promissory note or letter of credit. Here is how it worked. Imagine you are a merchant in Samarkand and you want to buy silk in Chang'an. You don't want to carry thousands of gold dinars across the desert because you'll be a target for every bandit along the route. Instead, you go to a banking house in Samarkand, one of the established Sogdian merchant families that operates branches in multiple cities. You deposit your gold with them and they give you a saftaja, a written document that promises payment of a specified amount to be collected at their banking house in Chang'an. You travel to Chang'an carrying this piece of paper instead of gold. When you arrive, you present the saftaja to the Chang'an branch of the banking house and they give you the equivalent value in Chinese currency minus a fee for the service. You use this money to buy silk. Then, when you return to Samarkand, you sell the silk for profit. The banking houses made this system work through trust networks built over generations. According to Professor Xinru Liu, many of the major Sogdian merchant families maintained family members in multiple cities along the Silk Road, creating literal blood connections across a trading network. When you deposited money with a banking house in Samarkand, you were trusting that their relatives in Chang'an would honor the payment, and that trust was backed by family reputation, by generations of successful transactions, by the understanding that if a banking house defaulted on a saftaja, their entire commercial network would collapse. The fees for this service were substantial, typically 5 to 10% of the value being transferred, but this was far cheaper than the risk of losing everything to bandits. And the system worked remarkably well. According to Dr. Valerie Hansen's analysis of commercial documents found along the Silk Road, defaults on saftaja were rare, perhaps 2 or 3% of transactions, a failure rate that is actually lower than modern credit card chargebacks. But the saftaja system did more than just move money. It created a web of mutual dependence and obligation that connected merchants across the entire Silk Road network. If you honored your financial commitments, you built a reputation that would precede you to cities you'd never visited. If you defaulted, word would spread and you'd find yourself unable to do business anywhere along the route. According to Professor Haidian de la Vessière, this reputation economy was the foundation of Silk Road commerce. In a world without enforceable international law, without courts that had jurisdiction across empires, reputation was everything. A merchant's word had to be literally as good as gold, because if it wasn't, no one would trade with you. Think about the discipline this required. You had to honor your commitments, even when it was inconvenient, even when circumstances changed, even when you could probably get away with defaulting, because the aggrieved party was thousands of kilometers away and had no way to pursue you legally. But merchants honored their commitments anyway, not because of legal enforcement, but because their future livelihood depended on their reputation. This is one of those fascinating examples of how commerce can create ethical systems. The Silk Road merchants weren't necessarily more moral than other people, but they operated in a system where honesty was profitable and dishonesty was disastrous. So they developed cultures and practices that reinforced honest dealing. Now, let me tell you about the partnerships, the commercial arrangements that allowed merchants to pool resources and share risks. According to research by Professor Abraham Udovich from Princeton University, whose work on Islamic commercial law provides crucial insights into Silk Road business practices, the most common partnership form was called a chirad, or commenda in Latin sources. This was an arrangement where one party, the investor, provided capital and another party, the travelling merchant, provided labour and expertise. Profits were split according to an agreed ratio, typically 2/3 to the investor and 1/3 to the travelling merchant, though ratios varied depending on the perceived risk and the merchant's experience. Here is a specific example of how this might work. Let's say you are a wealthy merchant in Merv, too old to make the dangerous journey to China yourself, but you have capital to invest. You find a younger merchant who has made the journey successfully several times, who knows the routes and the markets and the languages. You provide him with, say, 10,000 silver dirhams to buy Persian goods, glassware and metalwork and textiles to sell in China. You draw up a contract specifying that he'll use this money to buy specified goods, that he'll travel to Chang'an and sell these goods at the best price he can get, that he'll use the proceeds to buy Chinese silk and other goods to bring back to Merv, and that when he returns, you'll split the profit 60-40, with you getting 60% and him getting 40%, because you are providing the capital and bearing most of the risk. The travelling merchant accepts this arrangement because he doesn't have 10,000 dirhams of his own, but he has the youth and skill to make the journey. If the venture succeeds and he returns with goods worth 20,000 dirhams, you get 12,000, your original 10,000 plus 2,000 profit, and he gets 8,000, a fortune for a man who started with nothing but his knowledge and courage. But the partnership contract also specifies what happens if things go wrong. If the travelling merchant is robbed by bandits through no fault of his own, he is not liable for the lost capital. You, the investor, bear that loss. But if the merchant makes poor decisions, if he buys goods that don't sell, if he gambles away the money, then he is liable and has to repay you. According to Professor Udovich's analysis of medieval commercial contracts, these provisions created a careful balance of risk and incentive. The travelling merchant had an incentive to be careful and skillful because his profit depended on success. But he wasn't paralysed by fear of random misfortune because genuine accidents weren't his fault. And you, the investor, had an incentive to choose competent partners because your capital was at risk. The system worked because both parties had aligned interests. You both wanted the venture to succeed, and the contract clearly specified how to handle both success and failure. These partnership arrangements created chains of investment and risk that stretched across the entire Silk Road. A venture might involve 5 or 6 different investors, each putting up part of the capital, each taking a share of the profits. A single merchant might be carrying goods for a dozen different investors, managing a complex portfolio of contracts and obligations. According to Dr. Valerie Hansen's research, successful Silk Road merchants kept detailed written records of all their transactions, their contracts, their inventory, their debts owed, and debts owing. Some of these records have survived, found in desert caves and garrison towers, and they reveal the meticulous attention to detail that successful commerce required. Here is one example from a document found in Dunhuang, analysed by Professor Ikeda from Tokyo University. It is an inventory list from a Sogdian merchant who died in Dunhuang around 730 AD. The list, written in Sogdian, itemizes his possessions at the time of his death so they can be distributed to his heirs. It includes 43 bolts of silk of various qualities, with detailed descriptions of each bolt's origin, quality, and current market value. It includes 672 strings of Chinese copper coins. It includes various items of jewelry, furniture, and household goods. And most interestingly, it includes a list of debts, money owed to the merchant by various people, and money the merchant owed to others. The debts owed to him total about 3,000 silver dirhams. The debts he owed total about 2,000 dirhams. Net, he was ahead by 1,000 dirhams, but the existence of these debts tells us something important. He was operating on credit, both borrowing and lending, participating in a complex financial network where money was constantly flowing in multiple directions. The document also lists his partners in various trading ventures, men in Samarkand and Kashgar and Turfan and Chang'an with whom he had ongoing business relationships. Some of these partnerships had been in place for decades, relationships that had survived multiple trading journeys, relationships built on trust and mutual benefit. When this merchant died, his heirs didn't just inherit his physical goods. They inherited his business relationships, his reputation, his place in the commercial network, and those intangible assets were probably worth more than his silk and coins. Think about what this tells us about Silk Road commerce. This wasn't a simple matter of buy low, sell high. It was a complex relationship-based system where your success depended as much on who you knew and who trusted you as on your ability to identify profitable trades. The merchants who succeeded over long careers were the ones who invested in relationships, who honored their commitments, who built networks of trust and reciprocity. The merchants who treated each transaction as a one-time opportunity to maximize profit, who were willing to cheat or default when convenient, might make a quick fortune, but they couldn't sustain success because no one would work with them after they'd been burned once. Now let me tell you about the goods themselves, what was actually being traded, and why these specific commodities were worth the enormous costs and risks of Silk Road transport. The name Silk Road suggests that silk was the only or primary commodity, but that is misleading. According to Professor Shinru Liu, silk was important, especially in the early centuries of Silk Road trade. But by the 8th and 9th centuries, the variety of goods being traded was extraordinary. Let's start with silk, since that is what we've been focusing on with Jiang Wei's story. Chinese silk was prized throughout the ancient and medieval world for several reasons. First, the quality Chinese sericulture techniques, developed over thousands of years, produced silk thread that was finer, stronger, and more lustrous than anything produced elsewhere. According to research by Professor Dieter Kuhn from the University of Wittenberg, whose work on Chinese textile technology reveals the sophistication of Tang Dynasty silk production, Chinese silk came in dozens of varieties, from light gauze so fine you could see through it to heavy brocades woven with gold thread, from simple undyed white silk to complex multicolored patterns, created with sophisticated dyeing and weaving techniques. Second, the rarity. Until the 6th century AD, when Byzantine monks famously smuggled silk worms out of China, Chinese silk manufacturers held a complete monopoly on silk production. Even after sericulture spread to Byzantium and later to Persia, Chinese silk remained the gold standard, the most valuable variety. According to Dr. Valerie Hansen, a bolt of high-quality Tang Dynasty silk in Samarkand in the 8th century would sell for approximately 300 silver dirhams, equivalent to about 6 months' wages for a skilled craftsman, or roughly $18,000 in modern terms. That is an enormous price for a single bolt of fabric. But wealthy people throughout Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe were willing to pay it because silk was not just cloth. It was a status symbol, a display of wealth and power, but silk was just one commodity among many. Let me tell you about the spices, because the spice trade reveals another dimension of Silk Road commerce. According to Professor Paul Friedman from Yale University, whose work on medieval spice consumption illuminates the cultural and economic significance of these goods, spices were among the most valuable commodities in pre-modern trade, worth more per weight than almost anything except precious metals and gems. We're talking about black pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves and nutmeg from the Moluccas, ginger and cardamom and turmeric. These spices were used for flavoring food, certainly, but also for medicine, for perfume, for religious rituals, for preserving meat, and they were expensive beyond belief. According to Dr. Hansen's research, black pepper in Tang Dynasty Chang'an cost approximately the same per weight as silver. Think about that. Pepper was worth its weight in silver. A kilogram of pepper would cost about the same as a kilogram of silver, which in modern terms means that pepper was selling for roughly $500 per kilogram, or about $225 per pound. That is an extraordinary price for a spice that we now buy for $5 or $10 per pound at the grocery store. Why were spices so expensive? Partly because of the distances they travelled. Pepper grown in Kerala, in southern India, had to be transported by ship to Persian Gulf ports, then overland through Persia to Central Asia, then along the Silk Road to China, a journey of thousands of kilometers passing through multiple intermediaries, each taking their profit. According to Professor Shinru Liu, a commodity that went through 6 or 7 intermediaries might increase in price by a factor of 10 or 20 by the time it reached the end consumer. The merchant in Kerala selling pepper to a Persian trader might get 5 dirhams per kilogram. That Persian trader would sell it in Merv for 10 dirhams. The Merv merchant would sell it in Samarkand for 20 dirhams. The Samarkand merchant would sell it in Kashgar for 40 dirhams. And the Kashgar merchant would sell it in Chang'an for 80 dirhams or more. At each stage, the price doubled, reflecting the costs of transport, the risks of loss, the need to pay bribes and taxes, and of course the profit margin. But spices were also expensive because of their cultural meaning. In elite circles in Tang China, in Abbasid Baghdad, in Byzantium, using exotic spices in your food was a status marker, a way of demonstrating that you could afford rare and expensive goods from distant lands. According to research by Professor David Waynes from Lancaster University, medieval Islamic cookbooks include recipes that call for astonishing quantities of expensive spices, dishes that would have cost more to prepare than most people earned in a year. These weren't practical recipes for everyday meals. They were displays of wealth, culinary equivalents of wearing silk robes and gold jewellery. Let me tell you about another category of trade goods that is often overlooked: horses. According to Professor Christopher Beckwith's research on Central Asian history, horses were one of the most important and valuable commodities traded along the Silk Road, especially horses from the Fergana Valley in what is now Uzbekistan. These Fergana horses, sometimes called heavenly horses in Chinese sources, were prized for their size, strength, speed, and endurance. They were taller and more powerful than native Chinese horses, capable of carrying armoured cavalry, essential for military success. The Tang dynasty needed a constant supply of these horses for its cavalry units, and they were willing to pay enormous prices. According to Professor Peter Golden from Rutgers University, a prime Fergana stallion in Chang'an in the 8th century could sell for 1,000 bolts of silk, which at the values we discussed earlier means approximately 300,000 silver dirhams, or roughly $240 million in modern terms. That is not a typo. A single horse could be worth the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of modern dollars, making the horse trade one of the most lucrative sectors of Silk Road commerce. The trade worked like this. Nomadic tribes in the steppes north of the Fergana Valley bred horses, raising them on the vast grasslands that provided ideal grazing. Sogdian merchants would travel to the steppe camps and buy horses in bulk, typically paying with silk, tea, metal goods, and other Chinese products that the nomads wanted. The merchants would then herd these horses, sometimes hundreds at a time, along the northern Silk Road routes to markets in Turfan, Dunhuang, and eventually Chang'an. According to research by Professor Nicola D. Cosmo from Princeton University, whose work on the economic relationship between steppe nomads and settled civilizations reveals the complexity of these exchanges. The horse trade created a symbiotic relationship. The nomads needed goods they couldn't produce themselves: metal tools, cloth, tea, luxury items. The Chinese needed horses for military and transportation purposes. The Sogdian merchants made fortunes as intermediaries connecting these two economic systems, but the journey was extraordinarily difficult and risky. Horses are delicate animals despite their size, prone to injury and disease, requiring constant care and enormous amounts of food and water. A herd of 200 horses traveling from Fergana to Chang'an, a journey of approximately 4,000 kilometers taking 4 to 6 months, would need careful management every day. According to veterinary research on historical horse transport cited by Professor Beckwith, you could expect to lose approximately 15 to 20% of your herd during such a journey. Horses dying from exhaustion, disease, accidents, or theft. This was just an accepted cost of doing business, factored into the pricing. If you started with 200 horses and arrived in Chang'an with 160, you'd still make an enormous profit because the margins were so high. But imagine being the merchant responsible for that herd, watching horses die every week, knowing that each death represents a significant financial loss, knowing that if too many die, you might not make enough profit to cover your costs, and the investors who funded your journey will be ruined. The stress must have been immense. Let me tell you about one more category of trade goods, one that reveals the darker side of Silk Road commerce: slaves. According to Professor Valerie Hansen's research, slave trading was common along the Silk Road, though it is often downplayed in popular histories that prefer to focus on silk and spices. Slaves came from many sources: prisoners of war captured in the constant conflicts between Tang China, Tibet, the Turkic Khanates, and the Islamic Caliphates. People enslaved by raiders who attacked villages and caravans. Children sold by desperately poor families. Criminals sentenced to enslavement as punishment. According to Professor Matthew Gordon from Miami University, whose work on medieval Islamic slavery provides important context, the slave markets in cities like Samarkand and Bukhara offered human beings of many ethnicities and skill levels. There were agricultural slaves, the cheapest category, people destined for hard labor in fields and mines. There were domestic slaves, people who would serve in wealthy households. There were skilled slaves, artisans, and craftspeople whose technical knowledge made them valuable. And there were military slaves, young men who would be trained as soldiers, a practice that would eventually lead to the famous Mamluk warriors who dominated medieval Middle Eastern armies. The prices varied enormously depending on age, health, skills, and ethnicity. According to Dr. Hansen's analysis of price lists from Dunhuang, a young, healthy agricultural slave might sell for 30 to 50 silver dirhams, about the same as 2 horses or 10 bolts of medium-quality silk. A skilled artisan might sell for 200 to 300 dirhams. A beautiful young woman destined for a wealthy household might sell for 500 dirhams or more. These prices seem low by the standards of other trade goods, but remember that slaves were self-reproducing property. Buy a young female slave, and in a few years she might have children who would also be your property, multiplying your investment. The morality of this is appalling by modern standards, and I want to be clear about that. Slavery is an abomination, a fundamental violation of human dignity. But it was a reality of Silk Road trade, and understanding that reality helps us grasp the full picture of this world, not just the romantic vision of exotic goods and adventurous merchants, but also the brutal economics of a time when human beings were commodities. According to Professor Igor de Rakielts from the Australian National University, whose research on the Mongol Empire includes analysis of earlier Central Asian slavery practices, the slave trade along the Silk Road involved tens of thousands of people annually by the 9th and 10th centuries. A massive forced migration of human beings torn from their homes and families, transported thousands of kilometers, sold into lives of servitude. Every prosperous Silk Road merchant probably owned slaves. Every major city had slave markets. The wealth and luxury that financed the beautiful mosques and palaces and libraries of medieval Samarkand and Bukhara was built in part on the forced labor of enslaved people. Think about that for a moment. When we admire the achievements of Silk Road civilization, the cultural flowering, the architectural marvels, the scientific and philosophical advances, we have to remember that these achievements were built on foundations that included slavery, exploitation, and violence. This doesn't mean we shouldn't appreciate the genuine accomplishments, the cultural exchange, the technologies and ideas that spread along these routes. But it means we need to see the full picture, the light and the shadow, the creativity and the cruelty that coexisted in this world. Now let me take you into a day in the life of a Silk Road caravan, because beyond all the economics and the big stories, I want you to understand what it actually felt like to be travelling these routes, what you experienced day after day for months or years. Let's join Jiang Wei's caravan somewhere in the middle of their journey, on a typical day between Turfan and Kashgar, travelling along the northern route around the Taklamakan Desert. The day begins before dawn, around 4 or 4:30 in the morning in the summer months, when the caravan is travelling. According to research by Dr. Susan Whitfield, caravans typically travel during the coolest hours of the day, starting before sunrise and stopping by mid-afternoon to avoid the worst heat and to give the animals and people time to rest and recover. The camp stirs to life gradually. First, the guards who've been on night watch start waking the others. Then the cooks begin preparing breakfast, lighting fires, heating water for tea, making simple morning food, perhaps millet porridge or flatbread with dates and cheese. The smell of wood smoke and brewing tea fills the air. People emerge from their tents, stretching, yawning, dealing with the morning necessities of washing and relieving themselves. The camel handlers go to check on their animals, making sure none wandered during the night despite being hobbled, making sure none are sick or injured. Camels are examined individually, the handlers running their hands over each animal's legs, checking for injuries, looking at their eyes and mouths for signs of illness, checking the condition of the cargo and the ropes and saddles. According to modern veterinary understanding of camels, these daily health checks were essential. A camel developing a problem needed to be identified early, before a minor issue became a major one that could cause the animal to collapse. While this is happening, the merchants are having their own morning routines. Jiang Wei, as caravan master, meets with his senior staff, the head of the guards, the chief camel handler, the scouts who range ahead of the caravan checking the route. They discuss the day's plan, how far they'll travel, probably 25 to 30 kilometers if the terrain is good and the weather cooperates, what potential problems they might face based on the scouts' reports, whether there are any signs of bandits in the area, what the condition of the water sources ahead looks like. This morning meeting takes perhaps 15 or 20 minutes, everyone speaking tersely, efficiently. These are men who've travelled together for months and don't need elaborate explanations. By the time the sun rises around 5:30 or 6, breakfast is ready. The entire caravan gathers to eat, sitting in small groups, merchants and guards and handlers and servants. The food is simple but filling, millet porridge flavoured with a bit of salt and perhaps some dried fruit. Flatbread, hard and chewy. Cheese made from yak milk, a staple of Central Asian diet. Tea hot and strong, sweetened with honey or sometimes mixed with milk and butter in the Tibetan style. People eat quickly, knowing they have work to do. While some are still eating, others are already breaking down the camp. Tents are collapsed and packed. Cooking equipment is cleaned and stored. Everything has its place. A system developed over hundreds of journeys. Everything organized to minimize the time needed for setup and breakdown. The camels are loaded, a complex process that requires skill and attention. Each camel can carry approximately 150 to 200 kilograms of cargo, according to research on camel physiology by Professor Richard Bulliett from Columbia University. The loads must be balanced perfectly equal weight on each side, secured tightly, so they don't shift during the day's march, but not so tightly that they chafe the animal's skin and cause sores. An experienced camel handler can load a camel in about 10 minutes. With 200 camels, loading takes 3 to 4 hours, even with everyone working. By about 9 or 9:30 in the morning, the caravan is ready to depart. The order of march is always the same. First, scouts on horseback, ranging a few kilometers ahead looking for problems. Then the vanguard 20 or 30 guards, weapons ready, eyes scanning the landscape. Then the merchants and their personal servants, including Jiang Wei and the other senior members of the expedition, then the long train of loaded camels, managed by the handlers stretching sometimes for a kilometre or more depending on how tightly packed the caravan is. Finally, the rearguard, another group of guards watching for pursuit or ambush from behind. But the fundamental human experiences haven't changed. We still struggle with the same questions about ambition and family, trust and betrayal, risk and safety. We still make sacrifices for our careers, still leave people behind, still wonder if our choices are worth their costs. We still live in a world where economic opportunities are global, but human relationships remain local and personal. We still face the challenge of maintaining our integrity, our sense of self, in a world that constantly pressures us to compromise, to scheme, to prioritize profit over principle. The Silk Road merchants understood these tensions intimately. They lived them every day, and their stories can teach us something about how to navigate our own complex, interconnected world. Some lessons are cautionary. Jiang Wei's story warns us about the costs of betraying our principles, about how the pursuit of wealth can lead us to do things we never imagined we'd do, about how one betrayal leads to another until we find ourselves cut off from everything we valued. Rustam's story shows us the dangers of ruthless ambition, of treating people as mere instruments, of believing that the end justifies any means. His careful plans failed, not because of bad luck, but because he made enemies of everyone he dealt with, because his willingness to betray destroyed the trust that commerce depends on. Ashoka's story offers a different lesson, one about the possibility of changing your life, of choosing authenticity over safety, of deciding that you'd rather risk everything than continue living a lie. His decision to help Jiang Wei to betray his masters and forge a new identity was dangerous and costly, but it gave him something he'd been missing for 15 years. A sense of being a real person, rather than a performance. And Monet's letter reminds us that our choices affect others, that the people we leave behind pay costs we might not fully understand, that our adventures and ambitions have consequences that ripple outward in ways we can't always control or even see. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, I want you to think about your own journey. What risks are you taking? What are you hoping to find? What are you leaving behind? What would you be willing to betray for wealth or success? What would you refuse to compromise on, no matter the cost? These aren't easy questions, and I am not suggesting there are simple answers. The Silk Road merchants didn't have simple answers either. They made difficult choices in complicated circumstances, doing their best to navigate between competing loyalties and desires, succeeding sometimes and failing often, but always moving forward, always taking the next step on the endless road. That is all any of us can do, really. Make our choices as honestly as we can, treat others as fairly as we can, try to balance our ambitions against our responsibilities, and hope that when we reach the end of our own journeys, when we look back at the road we've travelled, we can feel that it was worth it, that we became the people we wanted to be, that we didn't sacrifice too much of what truly mattered for things that ultimately didn't. Thank you for travelling the Silk Road with me tonight, for walking beside Jiang Wei and Rustam and Ashoka and all the others whose stories we've shared. Thank you for listening to their struggles and their choices, for seeing their courage and their flaws, for understanding that they were human beings like us, facing challenges that aren't so different from our own, despite the 13 centuries that separate us. I hope their stories have given you something to think about, some perspective on your own life and choices. I hope you've been transported at least for a few hours to a different time and place, to the caravanserais and desert crossings and mountain passes of the ancient Silk Road. I hope you felt the weight of the silk and the cocoons, smelled the spices in the camels, heard the babble of languages in the markets of Samarkand. And I hope that as you drift off to sleep, you'll dream of journeys and adventures of courage and choice, of the long road that connects us all, past and present, east and west, the road of commerce and culture that threads through all of human history. Sweet dreams, my friends. May your own roads, whatever journeys you choose to take, lead you to places of wonder and growth. May you find the courage to take the risks that matter, the wisdom to avoid the ones that don't, and the grace to accept the consequences of your choices with honesty and strength. May you treat the people in your life with respect and care, remembering that your choices affect them in ways you might not fully see. And may you always remember that the true measure of a life isn't the wealth you accumulate or the distance you travel, but the person you become along the way, the integrity you maintain, the connections you preserve. Sleep well tonight, and thank you for joining me on this long journey into the past. I can't wait to share another story with you soon, another chapter in the great human adventure that spans all times and all places. Until then, rest peacefully, dream deeply, and remember that you are part of a long tradition of travelers, explorers, and seekers who have always dared to go beyond the familiar horizon, who have always asked what is out there, who have always taken the road less traveled in search of something more. The Silk Road may be ancient history, but its spirit lives on in everyone who chooses curiosity over comfort, who builds bridges rather than walls, who believes that the world is larger and more wonderful than any single perspective can capture. Carry that spirit with you, and may it light your way through whatever deserts and mountains you must cross. Good night, dear friends. Sweet dreams and safe travels wherever your road may lead.